guys, just in case, because like, oh my god. Have you ever been as intimidated by anything we've spoken about as this?
To be honest, I just think we should just say it's good and stop.
I think
it's good. Everyone go and see it and just end the podcast.
That's pretty as a statement, right? Just that.
I liked it because it was good.
It were good. It were real good. Yeah. It's
just so.
There you go. Job done. So, anything to pimp out, George?
So, guys, yes. Oh, bloody hell! I honestly, I'm flabbergasted. I'm utterly speechless. I rewatched it this afternoon, and it couldn't leave it alone. I thought, oh well, I've watched it once in preparation for this. I won't need to sit and watch the whole thing again. I can go and do other things.
It's too damn short. And I've never said that about anything. It's not long enough. It needs to be like another 3 hours or something. You don't
want it to end, do you?
I don't.
You want to live in it.
It's so immersive, and it's so, because you get so much happening, and there's so many suggestions, there's so many implications, there's so many little avenues it goes down, and then it just takes us down so far, and you think we could just be in this forever.
I was watching it and I was thinking, is it going to stop? Is it going to stop with the ideas now? Is it going to stop layering up all of these implications? No, is the answer. No. So, guys, if you are intimidated by something that is just shamelessly complex, like doesn't give a shit, and it's just so enthusiastic about its own ideas that it will just follow them in the same way that a mind does, like a child's imagination does.
But again, I'm reminded of the fact that how we're so far from the period of television when this could happen.
And so I was
you're sitting. But I was sort of reminded of it today because I ended up in this sort of weird thing of trying to remember what was on at Christmas when I was a child. Not just the films, but the television. So I just went to the BBC site and started looking back through the Radio Times. And there's a Radio Times, and it's BBC Two, around about 1985. And all Christmas Eve is just various things on Shakespeare, culminating in something like the BBC Shakespeare As You Like It or something. It's just, and you think, my God, a solid block of stuff about Shakespeare, just unapologetic.
The only
documentaries. And it's like, that's the old BBC. That's the BBC that used to exist.
That would have been relegated when it existed to BBC Four, obviously.
If at all.
If at all, and now that's gone.
Well, that's kind of what BBC Four was, wasn't it? It was kind of the last outpost of anything remotely resembling what the BBC used to be, where some I don't know, in almost a sort of ironic, self-aware way, the BBC was sort of going, look,
it wasn't when it was originally, but say it's almost like it's an inverted commas when BBC Four did it. It's like, oh look, now we're being sort of what we might consider a bit more highbrow, or this is a bit more high art.
Also,
it's like, you're sort of drawing attention to it,
Yeah, exactly. It was the last bastion,
just used to
but it was also the annexation of that material, wasn't it?
Exactly.
From the mainstream.
Balkanization.
Absolutely.
That's what it
to the reservation. Yeah,
exactly right. And if it made people bizarrely queasy to go and watch it because of the culture surrounding BBC Four.
Yeah, and I remember like the conversation around BBC Four was always that it's pretentious. It's the pretentious channel.
Which it rather did it to itself, because as I said, when it was BBC Two, it was just there. And it didn't give a shit in a way. It just it would put it on next to populist things. It would just that was your schedule. It would be like one moment you were at Glyndebourne with the opera. The next moment it was a new comedy with like the alternative comedians from the comedy store. And then next it would be As You Like It, or it was just never ring fenced. It was just there.
Well, this production represents that in every aspect, doesn't it? I was watching a documentary, an interview with Alan Clark and David Rudkin, and they were saying that, well, we were at Pebble Mill, and it was so far from the central authority of London that nobody cared. You didn't have the
That's
internet.
what
You didn't
the,
nobody was breathing down their throats all the time. So they just went and did it.
Plus, you'd also have the thing about the people who are in Birmingham who work on crew. They would definitely have been excited because they know they weren't in television centre doing all this kind of thing all the time. They would have brought their A game, which indeed they did. I mean, you can see it.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
Well,
there's a documentary on the Blu-ray. There's a short documentary as an extra on the BFI Blu-ray where they have some, cuts of interviews with various people. And David Rose says the same thing. He was the commissioning producer, and he said, we got away with this because we were in Pebble Mill and we were that far from television centre that you could get away with stuff like this. So even at the time, this was a bit way out there for the conventional mainstream BBC.
Watching it, I cannot believe it aired on mainstream television, and I cannot believe it aired in 1974.
It's unbelievable. It's so far ahead of its time.
I mean, can you imagine this if this were new and it aired now? What it would cause fucking uproar.
Well, I was reading an article about it.
It just couldn't.
I think it was on the website The Quietus, and they said the reviews the next day were because this was an era when television programs, serious television films and things like that, they used to be reviewed by the papers the following day. Actual sort of serious critics, he says laughably, would take it seriously, and and they said that the reviews the next day recognized that this was exceptional. There was a review the next day that said this is a masterpiece, and even the Daily Mail apparently gave it a good review. The Daily Mail said, this is really, really good. Whereas now, as you say, you put anything like this on television now, there'd be a storm of outrage about this, disgusting woke grooming our children,
anti-British. Anti-British. Oh yes,
but also it couldn't exist even in even if it reached the screen, and I don't mean purely in terms of production methods and aesthetics. It couldn't exist in the way it's executed as a script, and it couldn't exist in that form because the demands on it for closure and for narratives strands to be wrapped up, no imponderance. I mean, literally, you'd have to farm this off to sort of HBO or something before anyone, and then it would be even more different kind of beast again.
All the ambiguity would be removed. That's for damn sure.
It would be over-explained. The themes would be explained and spelled out. And
that shamanistic arc that he goes on would be so much simpler and cruder than it actually is. And that's the thing that gets me about the damn film. It consistently denies you any easy answers, and again, that might cause present day audiences to rail against it. It seems to be going one way, and then it will just keep throwing new ideas at you and new potential interpretations of those ideas. One of the definite problems with attempting to analyze this film now from a present day perspective is that there would be this tendency to come at it like a puzzle, as we've discussed before. Try and look at it as a code or a cipher and try to reduce it. Try and reduce it, and it just defies that. It defies reduction on every bloody level.
That I've never done, coming to the end of one of the things that we've decided to do as a podcast, which is I immediately just grabbed my laptop and just spewed up, not much, but just spewed up a little something, because I was positively febrile. I was shaking with what I'd seen. And then normally what I do with these, my standard thing with everything, whether it's The Wicker Man or further back, because I just bullet some things that I think I'll try and remember that, and they're on a notepad next to me or they're on my screen. But this I spewed and if you'll forgive me quoting it in full, it's not much.
No, of course.
But I just grabbed my computer and I just went, okay, this holds up a mirror to Middle England, or a certain kind of establishment England that should be aspired to, and says, not only is this priggish, pious, unfeeling, rigid, condescending, stiff-arsed, fashy, ridden with classism and racism and misogyny and hatred of poor people and hatred of new and very old ideas, but that it's a nightmare. It's dangerous. It's messianic to the point of apocalyptic. It's how a young man goes out into a field for a piss and comes back horribly burnt. It's why there are references to nuclear shelters and weapons of mass destruction and the collateral damage of ordinary people. It's how a person's entire future can be deemed in jeopardy if they don't please the schoolmaster writing the reference to the Russell Group University. And above all, it looks at all orthodoxies or small, quaint Little England and Little England values and imagines something better. Penda's blessing allows us to reclaim Elgar and Dickens and Blake and Shakespeare from the White Houses and Muggeridges of the world. I fucking love this film, and I put all that in bold uppercase type and then just shut my laptop. I mean, I knew there was much more to talk about, but that was just my instant snapshot. It was like I was shaking. It was such an emotional reaction to watching something. I just had to spew that out. And of the three of us, I'm the least writer of the three, the least writerly of the three of us. And it was just like, I gotta get this down. I
understand. I totally get it. I mean, that word reclaim that you use, though, it's so important. It's so important because one of the things I noticed this afternoon, actually, one of the things it actually does, which I was really astounded by, and it's something you don't see often in texts of its type, is that it does dare to say that, there is an idea of an England, of a Britain, that we can have, that it doesn't belong to the right, it doesn't belong to the reactionaries, it doesn't belong to the conservative, which is something we do tend to deny from our sort of ideological positions,
it's a sort of really constructed mythology of England. I mean, certainly Victorian, Edwardian, interwar, post-war. And what I love about the film is that it reveals them as flimsy, because Stephen's Little England is this weak myth compared to this deeper, richer legend of England's green and pleasant land. Because it's very much about tidying up or gentrifying, isn't it? You've got the history, the much more complex and fascinating history of our country, the history of the diggers and the levellers and John Dee and Jack Cade and Percy Shelley and William Blake and King Penda, rather than this awful, weak sauce, class-orientated, genteel hypocrisy, this sort of ossified Englishness that it deals with. This horrible white middle class, quaint village market town shit we're taught in school. Fate culture, village fate culture.
This ahistorical mythicism, which is empty. It's not even like mythicism is too big a word for it, isn't it? Because that suggests some sort of grandiosity, some poetry and purpose. Well, and what we learn is that it doesn't have that. These lies of identity are flimsy as hell. And we see that embodied in Stephen at the beginning. I mean, from the very beginning, some of his first statements when he is asserting, I am this, he's asserting it to us. It's his internal monologue, but he's asserting it to us. And it is a case of, the lady doth protest too much. It's the emperor's new clothes, my love. Everyone can see. It's like when you run into those people who have small man syndrome, and it's obvious to everyone that they have an inferiority complex. It's obvious to everyone but them. It's like that, isn't it? He's being accommodationist. He's attempting to assert something that he's not. And it's so complex. It's so complex when you take into account his positioning. There's something else the film does, which I think is fucking spectacular, which it doesn't ever actually state outright as such. It quietly asserts that there is something fundamental about us in terms of our identities. There is a core. There's something soulful, something poetic that is absolutely essential. And in Stephen, it's embodied in this kind of exile status, which everyone around him can sense. Everyone around him knows it, but him. And it doesn't matter how hard he tries to accommodate. It doesn't matter how perfect he embodies the prescriptions and sings the hymns and, gives the rote speeches. Everyone knows it. Everyone can sense it. These systems,
even the antagonists.
Right.
Even the antagonist, his teacher and so on.
Yes. They fundamentally reject him for it, and they always will. He's always going to be the exile. And I just, it's so quietly done. It's so beautifully embodied here. And I couldn't get over it.
Yeah, because, it seems like he is the ultimate conformist.
Yes.
He's nationalistic and jingoistic and patriotic. He knows all the English translations of the Greek tags that the school's got all over the place. He's a corporal or whatever it is in the school. What would they call it? ATC or something like that. You know, he's the ultimate sort of head prefect type, isn't he?
Yep.
And yet, the moment he starts to change, and he doesn't rebel at school, he withdraws ever so slightly, he retreats ever so slightly, and the minute he does that, what do they say to him? They say, well, you've never quite fit in.
You've never fit in, right? Exactly. And it's because they know. It's not just them as individuals, it's the systems. It's the systems. They can sense it. They know that this boy is an exile fundamentally in some ineffable way. And there are lots. I just love the way the film goes about deconstructing these descriptions of identity around him. So obviously one of the big ones is his burgeoning homosexuality, it's such a brilliant shorthand. The way it uses his homosexuality as a shorthand for his repositioning, or rather the reaffirmation of what his actual position is, which is he is outside. He is, as he himself says, he's muddled. He's neither one thing nor the other. I just think homosexuality becomes like a synecdoche for his wider position.
Thing that makes that seem so ahead of its time. And I acknowledge that saying that contains a little bit of the condescension of posterity, but it does feel like that. That is a real feeling that you get when you watch this. You watch this and you do feel, bloody hell, 1974, really? When you hear him say things like, my race is mixed, my sex is mixed, I am man and woman. And I know I don't think that's necessarily getting at what we hear when we hear that. When we in 2024 hear that, we hear something that I don't think was in the minds of people who were making this then, but it's still there for us to hear in 2024.
Yeah. Yes.
So we do, that is a real feeling, that sense of this being way ahead of its moment. And
that's elevation of the presentation of homosexuality, where it's investing homosexuality with its own metaphysics. It's not allowing the prescribed politics of the era to define what that status means.
It's the real radicalism in it as well, and because this sort
it's
of
the triumphant
is not
nature of that as a conclusion.
And because queerness of some stripe is not really a part of television drama. You would see it on the stage, in the more avant-garde side of the stage, or the more fringe side of the stage, maybe creeping into some people's work but watching as we've said, 1974, my God, 73, 74, and watching this and seeing how queerness in the narrative is this starting point as a rejection of patriarchy and the establishment on display, all the watered down Christianity, the cold showers, the tough contact sports, the whole obfuscating web. It's incredibly radically presented.
Yeah, and it's very important as well that it starts with his homosexuality. It's not the end of the journey. As I say, it's a synecdoche.
No, it's not.
It's part of the journey, but it is powerfully significant too. Because it's innate. So it's something that it's not entirely ideological. So it's not something that
because the thing I was left with was, from that strand of the film, was, I think rejection of sexual orthodoxy is a terrific kind of personal level rebutting of all the things we've talked about. I mean, yes, you've got to be gay or biqueer for it to work, but sexuality and gender as personal revolutions. Right. And I don't want to railroad us at this point, but it was just something I was left with, just an impression I was left with a long time after the film, because it stirred up a lot of other thoughts about radicalism and sexuality. And I thought, I've never been a biological reductionist when it comes to sexuality. I have to put my cards on the table. I don't fully buy into the it's in our genes narrative, because I fear that robs us of agency, and it can make us a prisoner of our genes. Of course, I believe a person is straight or gay, or various degrees between the two. But what I'm saying is, I think there is a freedom in there too, the freedom to embrace queerness as more than just a biological drive. And this film buzzes along with that. Stephen is clearly has repressed his sexuality, and it is manifesting and everything, but there is such a strong line in the film about this being both imperative but also choice. It's linked to his radicalism. It's linked to his ability to break.
There is a framing of homosexuality in the film whereby it is deviant. You know, it is innately deviant. It is against the norm in the sense that it is against what is prescribed and what is accepted as normal.
But it's already denounced what is accepted and normal. That's where it's radical rather than being libelous.
The film celebrates that. It doesn't denigrate him for that deviance. It says, no, this is fucking great. This is going to connect you to a deeper sense of self. And not only a deeper sense of self, this is going to connect you to a metaphysics and a weird kind of strange pantheistic nationalism that's bound up with the land and with the poetry. And it's more than that. Compare and contrast this presentation of queerness and homosexuality to how it's generally presented in media of the now, where it is quaint and bumbling and it's slightly comedic and it's just one of those things. It's disempowered now.
Well, this is why I say I think it is quite a contentious thought that I just put out there, and I know that's something that I could be seriously argued down about, but I think this is something that this film connects with as well. That's why it felt sort of legitimate for me to say, well, actually, I think it's much more complex.
Yeah, this film basically. I mean, it's in its own odd way. It's kind of assertive without being brash. It is a kind of fuck you in a very powerful way to the UK as it stands at the time of airing. At everything that's prescribed about practically every narrative you can conceive of, and that includes narratives of gender and sexuality and metaphysics. But it doesn't draw. What I love is it doesn't draw a distinction between these things. It doesn't compartmentalize them. So the deviance
it's deeply dialectical.
Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it just wonderful?
Yeah.
So the innate deviance of self-identifying as queer, and by the way, Stephen, when he realizes that he's queer, doesn't really question it. He just says, it's annoying to him. It's dissolving his assumptions of identity or the prescriptions of identity that have been bedeviling him. But he explores it. He actually runs with it and thinks about it. It's a concern for him. Identity becomes process rather than
moment when he just says to me on about whether, as he puts it, can homosexual people adopt children? And he says it as partly revealing himself as well. And it's just so there. There's no. It's a really sweet moment as well.
There's the very crucial sequence, of course, where it's like several sequences in this. It's ambiguous whether this is something that's actually happening or whether it's a dream sequence or what it is. But you have the sequence where the boys in their army uniforms have Stephen in the sports hall or whatever it is, and they've put ribbons in his hair. The scene is a scene of homophobic bullying. But in the course of that scene, you have, it's dated in the sense that it's equating homosexuality with sort of cross-dressing, essentially.
Right, yeah.
But in the language that it has available to it, it's trying to grapple with this. It's trying to grapple, I think, with queerness as a sort of on a deeper level as just this transgression or evasion of these categories that people are forced into, and that's I think what it's getting at there. And of course it's homophobic bullying, and he initially is trying to hide the ribbons that they put in his hair out of shame. They pull I think it's Honeybone actually pulls his hands away to reveal the ribbons, and everybody cheers because these weird rituals of humiliation that are absolutely essential to that kind of education. But then he stands there and he looks at them all. There's that moment where, having had his hands taken away from the ribbons which are obviously now freighted with all this, he just stands there and he looks at them like, there you go, and they stop laughing. And he just walks out. He doesn't pull them out of his hair, he just walks out. So you have that
Frankensteinian element, isn't there? They don't know what they've done there. They don't know
They've
what they
yeah,
created or unleashed there.
they've done it now. They've done it now because he said, "Okay, then if that's I'll wear ribbons in my hair if that's what this
Yeah.
means.
There's also
Fuck you.
there's a
I'll stare you down."
revelatory, just like everything Stephen
and I
experiences, there's a revelatory element to it, isn't there? It's like he's been broken down on every level at that point. His sexuality is not what he assumes it should be. His
I think this is the
identity,
key to this problem that we've kind of been dancing around, which is that whatever the thing about sexuality, and Orwell kinds of gets at this in 1984, where he talks about the party's attempts to destroy family life and the sex drive, the whole anti-sex league thing. He talks about the fact that sex destabilizes political control over people, because it's just one of those forces within people that it just causes people to slip beyond the bonds of social control and the ability of authority to control them. Whatever sexuality is, whether it's something that's just innate to us or whether it's something that we're socialized into or some combination of the two, what we're talking about is someone's inner nature. And the thing about sexuality is that it's such an incredibly powerful part of one's essential selfhood, one's essential because it's one's personhood and one's materiality and one's animalness all sort of linked up together. It's your higher and lower functions all linked up together, and it's such an incredibly powerful part of your selfhood, even in the absence of it, because some people are just not sexual, and that is itself an incredibly powerful thing as a negation. It is something that, because it's that core of yourself that combines every part of you in a way that is incredibly vital and powerful, in the same way as like needing to breathe and needing to eat, except that it's inherently social. I mean, I know eating is social, but sexuality is even more so. It's that essential bodily function, which is also an expression of your personality and your selfhood and your emotions, and it's you interacting with society. It's this part of you that is inherently destabilizing if it can't be controlled. So what we have here is just Stephen has this part of himself that is completely at variance with who he's supposed to be, who the power structure, who the social structure says you must be. And as you say, he accepts it. As soon as he starts to realize it, he is troubled by it. You have the dreams, and he says at one point unclean or unnatural or whatever it is, but it doesn't take him long to realize this is just who I am.
This is what I am.
And the theme of whether this is something that you just are or whether it's something that you do is indeed something that flows through the film, because you have the teacher that says to him, "You've never quite fit in," with all the subtext of that. But you also have, in the scene where his housemaster is talking to him, he says, this choice you've made to not fit in, this is a choice you're going to have to make over and over again every day for the rest of your life. So it's both. It is just yourself. It is just who you are. And we've already noticed it about you and condemned you for it and expelled you for it. But it's also something that you do. And one of the wonderful, it's a perfect example of the sort of gnarly, gritty, interesting things that this text does. It contradicts itself in fruitful ways, because on one register, that is power being arbitrary in order to victimize you and control you. It's power saying, you are this. There's nothing you can do about it. We're going to treat you as an outcast because of it. And also we're going to blame you for it as if it's something you've chosen to do out of sheer perversity. But the film is also saying, on another register, the film is saying the exact same thing, but as a good thing. It's saying, yes, it's who you are, and that's good, and it's also something that you do, and you can take ownership of that as your self-expression.
Yeah, you can take power.
I love the way that Rudkin writes that scene as well, because it really gets to the heart of again, something that goes through the film, about how so many people who make up the Society of England, let alone Britain, even the Society of England in 1974, they have to carry so much ahead of them, whether that's their ethnicity, their gender, their sexuality, because there's this white male patriarchal dominating force, this hegemony exists in the primary as well as the secondary, whereas everything else lives in their secondary, their idea of a secondary. And this this remark about you'll have to I can't remember the exact words, Jack. You just said them about do this every day of your life. What's the
you'll have to make this choice.
Make this choice. That's again. Yeah, it's just a real reminder of the ignorances that white male heteronormative people can fall into, because in a sense they don't carry anything ahead of them, particularly if they are also part of a particular class as well. Whereas other people have these things that they have to carry ahead of them, that as perceived by the hegemonic class, and it's really very, very well done in that kind of pithy line. It's like, yes, it's all there. Actually. It's all there
in that one scene,
almost a throwaway line.
Yeah, in the threat, it's in the implied threat. It demonstrates how moribund these systems actually are. We can't promise anything. We can't give you anything.
But it's exhausting as well. I mean, and different people have deal with it. Have different degrees of it as well. But when you've got whatever it is, something about something. Well, your religion or your ethnicity or your sexuality, and you've got to sort of, it's like an aura around you all the time. As being, it's exhausting for the individual, and you get Stephen's exhaustion as well. You get the exhaustion of him trying not to be that who he is.
Well, it's the
exhaustion when he is as well.
It's the disassociation as well, isn't it? It's the displacement, which I think all of us here identify with on a very profound level. It's that sense of being apart which you just can't shake, and it doesn't matter how hard you try. We all know that you are always apart, right? And that is exhausting. That in and of itself is exhausting, because you always do have to play to a certain degree. It's that whole tension, that central tension within the film of between the masked self and that fundamental essence, that truer self that's underneath. And when I say a truer self, one of the great complexities of the film is that these things are not monolithic. So when it talks about self beneath the masks, when it talks about the identity that's truer than those that are prescribed, it doesn't mean something that can be defined or that is universal as such.
No,
it's something that is a flux. It's something that's in motion all the time, and which is confused, as Stephen again expresses and embodies at the end when he says, "I'm muddled, I'm mixed, I'm this, I'm that." That's kind of, insofar as the film has a thesis or a message. That's it, right? That's it. It's accepting that we are flux, that we are not fixed, and that's not bad. It's not a terrible thing. No matter what the powers that be or the assumptions of tradition try to impose upon you, it's not a bad thing. It's difficult and it's problematic, and yeah, it's going to cause you pain. It is. I think the film leaves you with that feeling with regards to Stephen. You don't know what his future is. He walked back from the fen, wanders back home, and it's this strange, I don't know, slightly cold feeling after the celebratory revelations that he's had up to that point. You don't know what his future is. And one of the funny things about looking back, having the experience of history, so he's a young homosexual man in 1974. What is he likely to live through?
Yeah.
Well, AIDS, of course, immediately jumps out. Right. The AIDS epidemic.
Exactly.
And the homophobia, the organized reactionary backlash to the beginnings of the gay liberation movement that you see in Thatcherism. He's got all that to look forward to.
He's got all of that to
and
come.
He's still going to be a young man through that as well.
He's got the ferocious fight back, the lashback of the system that is represented by the two demons on the mountain, the mother and father of England, the White House and Muggeridge analogues. He's going to be fighting them all his life.
I mean, those two are so interesting, aren't they? The film ostensibly presents them as demonic figures, but they appear, the way they're embodied, and the language they use is of purity.
He's at the top of a mountain, and they tempt him. I mean, the biblical analogy to Satan taking Jesus to the top of the mountain and showing him the world and offering him power. It's very clear what's happening.
Yeah. Oh,
He's
absolutely.
being
And
tempted.
it's very interesting that when you compare their language to that of Penda, who comes directly after, their language is all that. It's all dominion and offerers of power. And it's interesting that they are the mother and father of England, because Penda does point out that they would have you infantilized forever.
Yeah.
They offer you power, but it's an offer. It's their power that they're
It's their
giving.
power,
And
yeah.
you will
And-
live in their prescriptions, in their mythology forever and ever and ever.
They're only the mother and father of England because they claim them to be and style themselves that. They're like mummy and daddy and the people under the stairs. They're mummy and daddy in that sense.
Yeah,
They've arrogated that power.
That's why
through,
the vision of the chopping of the hands is so great. I mean,
Oh,
wow,
God,
that's school. The prayers, the hymns, the tedious parables, the bullying from the teachers, the systemic bullying that fosters. Wear this uniform, think these thoughts, know your station. I mean, my parents' generation had the full-on sort of stentorian bark of school. We had it a bit more groovy play school fashion before high school, but it was still repression. It was still Christian values, one-size-fits-all bullshit. It's very much, here, kids, put out your hands. Put your hands in ours. You won't need your own. Literally, put your hands in mine. And
the metaphor is fairly stark.
This. Yeah,
isn't it? It's fairly stark. I mean, it's and again, it's incendiary, just like everything in this bloody film. It's absolutely incendiary. Showing the mother and father of England mutilating children, and also making those children complicit and happy in their mutilation.
You don't need these. You don't need these.
Yeah.
We've got this covered for you. It's very.
You don't need to do anything. There's no need for you to do things or make things or create.
Right.
There's no need for you to have the ability to have a handle on the world to be able to manipulate history.
Right.
You must. We have the hands. You have the bloody stumps. That's how it works. And you will volunteer for that, and you will like it, and you will smile.
You'll smile. You'll skip away smiling. Yeah,
and this is why I love the way that it's all this kind of feeds into this curious thing about the film, which I love, which is that it's not sure whether it's 1955 or 1973. It's like a kind of weird amalgam of the two, because of course, if you look at the letter that Stephen gets on his 18th birthday, it's dated 1955, but the aesthetics of the film are early 70s. So then you're like, well, this is a very, very conscious and smart piece of television, both from Rudkin and Clark. So you get this idea of them tapping into historical cycles, either historical cycles or a kind of ever nowness that these very conservative and reactionary people like the Whitehouses and the Muggeridges ache for. But whether it is 10 years or 30 years after the Second World War, there's so much embedded in a certain kind of aspirational Englishness, the Englishness that Stephen has in the early parts of the films, which is the Englishness of Whitehouses and Muggeridge avatars that we get at the end, that it's as we've been discussing, shot through with ideas of national purity and racialism and fucking blood and soil stuff. So and then you're left with this thing, watching this film, which can't quite decide whether it's 1955 or 1973, because it's kind of both. That ostensibly what, we, and I put this in inverted commas, what we fought fascism about, which everything from the adoption revelation to the struggle over his sexuality helps him explode. Every gay youngster has a claim to England. Every mixed race person, every woman, every working class kid. It won't be the prize of these grotesque and reactionary Middle Englanders, no matter how much they sort of gun for it. But it does show up how there isn't some easy context with this, as I say, this 1955-1973 thing, for the kind of post-war England, that actually shitloads of people were in line with Nazi ideology. It's something I was actually reminded, watching quite a lot of the sequences from that part of Penda Sven, of Ishiguro, Remains of the Day. It's what he does, which it mines a similar ground to Penda Sven in its way, but this imperialist war, there were definitely people in it fighting against Nazism, even if it was an imperialist war, and many of those who'd survived fighting fascism in Spain, for one. Jack mentioned Orwell, but our ruling class was full of people who were absolutely okay with Hitler and Mussolini's ideology. They just didn't like their ambitions. They didn't like where the expansion was leading. And this is coming through in this film in the same way that it comes through, I mean, much more explicitly in Ishiguro's Remains of the Day, because it's actually a plot point in Remains of the Day. But, you know, you're in this kind of nebulous post-war 1955, 1973 thing where a lot of the reaction it is still there, despite it being the kind of brave new world that we ostensibly found after fighting against fascism and Nazism in the 40s. It's so potently there in that narrative.
Oh, yeah, and it's expressed often in microcosm as well. I mean, you have that speech early on that Stephen gives to his class about the television program.
It's there. It's in there as well.
Oh,
it's fizzing away.
Within the space of 2 breaths, he says, England is the freest country in the world. And then he actively calls for the censorship of ideas that just don't conform. Right?
That is so 2024, isn't it? He stood up there advocating essentially fascist ideas. This class believes that the media is a source of evil in society, right? That's the motion that's being debated. Essentially, fascist ideas advocated, and he's advocating them using the language of anti-fascism.
Right. And isn't it amazing as well, the reaction
murky, deliberately obfuscating, combining bits of ideology to make it seem radical, and it's deeply reactionary, and it's contradictory, and it's like, and it's deliberately designed to make people find it very, very difficult to navigate.
And within universe, of course, you have the innate contradiction that he is not what he's expressing.
No,
we know he's not. His eternal life is not that.
What he's expressing doesn't exist. This is what the film is saying. His ideology of censorship in the name of decency, which is all about actually policing the ideas that the public are allowed to be exposed to. Investigative theology, something about who actually was Jesus, who actually was Christ, this figure who was at the center of the ideological hegemony that, of this white imperialist nation. No, you must not hear these questions. You must not even know that there are questions. You must not. And the thing that we're people exercising eternal vigilance on our behalf. The thing that those people, those hand choppers, are trying to do is preserve this wonderful country. And what's wonderful about this country, it's because we're all free and we're all pure. And the film shows you exactly the opposite. It shows you that what's bad about this country is that it's not free. It thinks it is, but it thinks that the problem is the striking minors or whatever it is. But as Arne points out in his rather pompous way, nobody understands the constant deadly war that's being fought against ordinary people all the time. And the contradiction, the contradiction of the other guy who keeps interrupting him, who says the British working man would never tolerate a police state. He's too bloody minded. And you're like, well, how would the British working man fight against that? Might it be, I don't know, strikes?
Strikes. Exactly.
The things that are actually good about this country are all to do with the fact that it's the exact opposite of what you people say it is. It's like the vicar says when they tell Stephen who he is, he says to him, "You're like the English language, Stephen. You have foreign parents." This is what the film gets at all the way through. The thing that's actually wonderful about this country is that it is this gigantic mongrel. It is this gigantic mixture of Saxon and Norman, and it's Boudica slaughtering Roman centurions. It's all that. That's what's worth having about it.
What's also really interesting, just on a very small level, is that what I love about that scene, because Arne's got problems as a character, and that's a good thing. Arne is not an ideal.
Arne's an asshole.
He's not an ideal. He's not an ideal character, and that's a good thing. But what I love in that scene is it's the one point where, as you say, he is being very pompous and so on. But there's a really nice thing going on, which is he is at least trying to present an idea, and everyone, including Stephen, is just resorting to ad hominem attacks on him. They
completely closed.
Never put a counter argument to him. The bluff colonel, whoever he is, that's the closest he gets with his contradictory thing about the working class. They wouldn't stand for it. The working man wouldn't stand for it. But yeah, it's just a really good little moment as you listen to the script sings. It absolutely sings anyway.
Our entire conversation at this moment, it's our entire conversation, isn't it? Why are you fighting back? How dare you
that's
fight
why it doesn't
back?
matter if
What
it's
about the
1955
consequences
or
of fighting back?
or 2024 or
we're fighting back because there's this danger and there's that danger and there's this danger and there's that danger, to which the response is, oh, that won't happen, to which you say, why not? To which people say, oh, people wouldn't let that happen.
So, hello.
You mean because people would fight back?
Right.
Whereupon, of course, when they did that, you would oppose them, as you always do, as you are doing now. That is that is the conversation about strikes or protests or demonstrations or revolution that I have been having my entire adult life.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things about Arn is the film, again,
about anti-fascism.
Right.
Sorry, go on.
It refuses to give you an easy answer. Again, the tendency would be to make Arn almost like an heroic figure, right? In most other narratives. It doesn't do that. No. Doesn't do that. It demonstrates actually that he's actually kind of impotent. He's often right. What he's saying is absolutely correct, and the film is aware of that. But it also demonstrates that because he's using language that is itself kind of prescribed and is part of these systems, these systems know how to handle it, which is they just ignore it. They ridicule and ignore. Stephen is doing something that is, in its own peculiar way, much more effective.
And the narrative extinguishes Arn. The narrative eventually extinguishes Arn. He disappears from it. Mrs. Arn becomes a greater focus. He just goes. He just vanishes.
Even though Mrs. Arn doesn't really get it, she doesn't really get the undercurrent of the conversation she has with Stephen. She is still the more important influence on Stephen in that conversation. And Arn, very crucially, the script goes out of its way to do this. Arn has the book that Stephen needs, the place name book, the place name directory. Right. Stephen is on the trail of it. He wants his father's place name directory to work out what's going on. Arn has it. Arn has had the book this entire time. He doesn't find in the book what Stephen finds in the book.
No.
Right. Which is really key, isn't it? It's really key. This guy has all the right ideas, he has all the right perspectives, but he can't do anything with them. He can't do anything with them. Part of that is due to, it's a really dark commentary, but all of the adults in this film are kind of lost already. They're done. Stephen's father gets to this. He gets to the very heart of this much later on when you have that, quite frankly, the best moment in the film, which is that amazing speech, that dialogue that he has with Stephen towards the end, which is just... if there's a part of the film that makes all the hackles go, all the hairs stand up, it's that, right? It's that. But he basically says that we're done, Stephen. I cannot live sincerely because I'm already trapped. I'm already in the teeth of this machine. I have to, he says to him, I crucify Christ every day in my church because I can't tell the truth of him. I can't tell the truth of his stories, of the mythologies that informed him. I have to play the part. I have to be my insincere self. And that's true of every adult in this film.
He can write the radical treatise, but he has to hide it in his study. He can write it, but he can't publish it. Somebody tries to put it on television. It gets stopped by Mummy and Daddy. Arn has to make his plays less confrontational because people won't buy them, buy the outrageous plays anymore. And he's given in to that because he wants his very bourgeois rural cottage life where his wife actually does most of the gardening for him.
Exactly. Yes, the film frames on in a very interesting way. He has all of these anarchistic, very sort of, fight the power ideas, but he just talks about them. He doesn't really live them.
No. He's fundamentally content to go to the village meeting and annoy the Blue Rinse Brigade and spar with the vicar and pose and talk. Yeah. But he's comfortable. He's comfortable in that.
Whereas Stephen's dad isn't, and that's so interesting. That is so fascinating. There's a scene early on, actually, which I think is fucking brilliant. It's where you get the first hint of Stephen's homosexuality when he's kind of slightly low key obsessed with the milk boy, and his mum and his dad know.
Yeah,
they know.
Yeah,
They see it. This parson and his wife living in rural England in the 1970s. No, and it's not a thing. They don't. It's almost incidental. It's accepted. It's such a strange dialogue that they have, where it's like they know that Stephen doesn't know. He doesn't see it yet. It's
they almost sort of wryly laugh about, it's the cliche, isn't it? Oh, the milk boy.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they say. That's exactly what the parson says. Oh, what a cliche with the milk boy of all things, right? Of all things. Those characters are amazing. They're so wrinkled, they're so complex. And then, of course, you have the conversations. When Stephen is on his journey, his father acts as almost like a weary sage, like a guide, Yeah. He's almost like Virgil guiding Dante through hell. And then, it's so interesting.
And then you get kind of the flip side of that. You get the very dark scene where Stephen and his mother are in the car, and she's panicking because he's obviously stopped trying at school. So, she can see it. She can see the future of financial viability disappearing. And she says to him, you'll end up on the conveyor belt. And a man can't leave the conveyor belt for a moment.
Right.
That horrifying vision.
Yeah,
of essentially falling into the proletariat. That's what she's talking about.
Of
the eternal sort of middle class horror of you're going to drop out of the middle class into the proletariat.
Yeah, but there's a wider resonance to even that conversation, because it's commenting it's not just about Stephen's potential future. It's about the way things are. It's about this encroaching industrialization. It's what Arne calls playing Monopoly with the countryside, where everything is being chewed up and spat out, including human beings. She's commenting upon that, and she's trying to come up with some solution whereby Stephen will escape it. And, well, even if he does, he's still going to be in the teeth of the machine, love, Well,
it's very human, and it's very understandable, because she wants her son to escape, and that everybody wants that. Everybody wants themselves and the people that they love, the people that they're close to personally escape. And that's very understandable.
And it's very understandable that Arne people want to, sometimes, people who care about you want you to escape through conformity as well.
Yes, right.
Exactly. Safe, to be secure.
That's one of the wrinkles. That's one of the wrinkles in the conversation.
We're back to Orwell.
Right. It's coming from a good place. It's coming from a place of concern, maternal concern, there's no doubt. But it's also coming from an interesting place of fear and anxiety over Stephen's non-conformity. Which is fascinating in and of itself.
Yeah, because it's the ripples, I guess, isn't it? Because I was saying earlier about, all these things that you carry ahead of you if you don't fall squarely into. But it ripples outwards. It's also the people around you who have to, who have to hear the questions or see the looks or get the comments. They have to rehearse their responses. They have to be on guard as well.
Right.
And of course, if they've had a particular kind of existence as his parents have,
right?
They are still human at the end of the day. It's fear. She's in the car. She's afraid. Yes. She's afraid for him. She's afraid for herself.
She is afraid for herself. Is there a selfish element to this too? Yes, absolutely. Sure. They occupy a particular position within the society, right? Stephen, by his very nature, has to be seen to be behaving in a particular way for them to maintain that status, in the same way that his dad has to behave a particular way, even though he doesn't believe in it anymore. It's amazing. The complexity to every bloody exchange in this film. We're going to just not want
she understands, in a sort of, she understands in a sort of pre-political way what Arne is trying to get at, which is the encroaching total dominance of the industrial capitalist society, and what an inhuman horror show it is. She understands that, and she's she's one of those people who, through her social position, has a kind of a bolt hole away from it, even as it creeps up. And she can see the danger that her son is in of falling out of that class that have that slightly privileged position.
Yes, and I think this is again,
and the reason that's the whole reason that's terrifying, the whole reason that the school stresses the need for conformity so that you can continue to be part of this privileged upper class, is because they know the nature of their own system. They know that most people in the world do not have that privilege, and they are completely subject to this gigantic ravenous machine that just devours people.
Yeah. But also they know it's flimsy, right? They know that any deviance, any subversion is potentially catastrophic. And Stephen is catastrophic. By his nature, Penda points this out to him, right? That's his purpose. He's the ungovernable. He's the muddled. He's the mixed.
The sacred demon of ungovernableness.
Right.
The sacred demon of ungovernableness.
So fucking brilliant. It's so fucking brilliant. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. That journey that Stephen goes on, that shamanistic journey, which is bound up to like romantic metaphysics and to poetry and music, but also to rebellion, active rebellion, and also his own inner deviance as a result of his homosexuality and his abandonment of all of those prescribed identities. It's so wonderful.
It was really interesting to come to this. I read it early. Well, reread it. I've read it before, but reread it earlier in the years, which is Walter Benjamin's Profane Illumination, where he devotes a huge section to André Breton. And I just, you were saying earlier, George, about, this has idea upon idea upon idea, but it also has so much space for overreading as well. By which I don't mean overreading in the sense of, but actually sort of superimposing things on that fit and align with it. But I just kept thinking of this book through huge sections of watching Penda's Fen, because Benjamin talks about Breton's sort of desire for an emotional vocabulary that's in conjunction with mythology and symbolism, and so much of this film is working on that level. So he had this view that you have to embrace a sort of deep contradiction in both rhapsodizing or giving yourself up to a romanticism, but also sort of exploding it at the same time, blowing it apart. And you have that manifesto, which is terrifically aligned with this piece, because Stephen acknowledges that he has to embrace the past, but to create a new future for himself, where he can see it liberated from the mother and father figures, the White House and Muggeridge figures, and all those deep visions. Again, we're back to Breton and the Surrealists. They keep here. They're bursting through the earth. Of course, they're bursting through Penda's Fen. Just as the Surrealists' idea of them bursting through the unconscious. The project is in both Breton's works and in this Rudkin play is to harness their energy, their symbolism, and you get that juxtaposition that will charge, as in almost like electrically charging, both the past and the present with the spirit of revolution. The need to see things in terms of an engine of history, to recognize their radical power, to use them to fuel the individual, in this case Stephen, to become a sacred demon of the ungovernable. And it's exactly akin to Benjamin himself when writing about Breton, talking about our consent to be asleep. Many 19th century thinkers and writers viewed, for example, time as being this sort of barren waste, and Benjamin, like Breton, saying no, there are ruptures, there are things that come through portals, there are experiences that are a kind of motor for an inner and outer transformation. And that's all here in this play. That's what Stephen's going through. It's symbolism, it's the unconscious, it's mythology, it's embracing of contradictions. And they were just like, this is great. I read this like 8 months ago, and it's just so beautifully aligned with what I'm watching in this film.
No, it is. You're absolutely right. And you have that hang on, let me shift my cat. Rufus, go away. Oh, sorry. Testing all of my wires and whatnot.
But it is that thing of, having, the thing has ideas. Of course it does. It is transmitting ideas, but the space for reading for aligning texts on top of it is so so open, so
But it's making the English countryside, literally the English landscape, into this landscape of ideas and landscape of possibilities.
Yeah.
It's a version of the physicality of England, where you can find the ghost of Edward Elgar, cold
in an old shed
and weeping in this abandoned whatever it is, and an angel rises from the fens, and a demon crawls down from the architecture of a church. It's a landscape of possibilities, as I say. It's a landscape of suggestions.
But what I love about that Elgar moment, which is brilliant, is because I love the way that Rudkin through Elgar. And it's good because Stephen needs to hear this. It's about what you need to hear, maybe rather than what you want to hear, because he demystifies the dream of Gerontius, but it doesn't kill its power as a piece of music. It actually makes it more resonant because it's not divine, it's human. It's a human being plugging himself into what's already been created and produced by culture and saying, well, what can I make of this? Like when he reveals what the source is, and I mean that's the most exciting thing about that's the most exciting thing about being a human being. You rearrange the information around you to create new information and ideas that work for people in their moment. So and you don't get hung up on the divine. You relish what we can do, but rather than that sort of making things seem commonplace or boring or bare, actually the way Rudkin achieves it in this is an access to making us realize that in itself is even more divine. It doesn't come from God. It doesn't come. It's you. It's us. It's how we interact with each other and everything else. And the fact that Elgar is presented as he is, not as this sort of great monumental figure that Stephen idolizes, but this man of flesh who is weak and dying, and it goes through this anecdote about this awful operation he's been through. That he is meat and blood and sinew, as well as the guy who pulled the Enigma variations together, or the dream of Gerontius, or whatever.
Again, it's emblematic of this deconstruction of everything that Stephen presumed to be sacred within the purview of.
Well, it's a warning about romanticizing the past.
Right.
Yeah, that's why we have this
exactly that,
because it's so easily done. But I think, according to the most reactionary narratives, I mean, I guess we're all guilty of balking when, like we were saying earlier, sort of balking when people talk about England and Englishness, and and some of the sort of cultural artifacts or historical figures that they use to buttress their viewpoint. But as Jack was saying earlier, this country's history is so chock full of other things, that the radicalism, the magic, the invention, the art, that has nothing to do with the establishment. They just try and buy it up. And Stephen gets to enjoy one without having to subscribe to the ideology of the other any longer. I mean, that's sort of key to it. You don't have to engage with things on their terms.
That's it. He gets to something truer, doesn't he? He gets to something more fundamental. And one of the things the film does seem to be saying, I mean, if it's saying anything specific, is you don't have to allow them that territory,
No, they
you
don't.
Only allow.
They're trying to harness
it's ours.
Yeah, they're trying to harness it.
It's not theirs.
But it's the way it's also turned into a kind of tawdry nonsense, because, Elgar,
they've been
Blake,
enclosing the common land since the dawn of capitalism.
That's exactly it. It's the same thing as the enclosures. I mean, we grew up thinking that, Elgar and Blake were ring-fenced until we experienced them. Shakespeare is another. It's a big one for me. I know it's a big one for Jack, because it absolutely defies their domestication, their gentrification.
Blake is. I mean, this point is very specifically made in the film via Blake, because you have the scene where the headmaster of the school talks about, our unofficial school song and every true Englishman's other national anthem, and
which is hilarious.
The most
Jerusalem. And Blake's Jerusalem is the poem that has, it's the dark satanic mills.
Yeah.
It's literally a poem about would Christ, the actual radical Christ, the actual apocalyptic revolutionary prophet of social justice that we're really talking about when we talk about this figure, would he have come to this place where we have done this thing, where we have enclosed the common lands, where we have set up the dark satanic mills, where we are turning it into modern industrial capitalism, where we have workhouses and children in factories? Would he have done that? No, he wouldn't. Or, would we have this world that we have? Because that's the world that Blake's writing about.
Right, and also it relates far wider the positioning.
But they've enclosed it. Even that radical statement has been completely appropriated and enclosed, but only if you don't listen to it, and only if you don't actually feel it.
Don't listen to the words. Don't actually look at the context of this, and also definitely don't research what Blake thought about nationalism and industrialism, because that would break everything down, wouldn't it?
But it's an incredible sleight of hand, isn't it? It's an incredible sleight of hand until particularly when you're young, and either it kind of fits with that sort of, when we were talking about the Wicker Man last time and saying about the monumentalism built around that as a genre piece, where people wouldn't watch it, or the monumentalism built around Citizen Kane because it's always viewed as the greatest film of all time. It's that similar thing until you actually engage with, say, an Elgar or a Blake or a Shelley or a Shakespeare, or on your terms, out of curiosity. They've been monumentalized and turned into something they're not by the very forces sort of ranged against you. And it's like,
powerfully misapprehended.
As like you're telling me they are.
Right.
They're not your people at all. My God, Blake, for God's sake. Shakespeare, what they wrote. I mean, I know Shakespeare's a slightly more complicated one because he would do things for the aristocracy. But he was basically the first of a modern man, really.
Blake was
like
a
modern bourgeois man. But I mean, come on,
every level.
But you can still read so much into Shakespeare. It's like, this is not your guy. He might sometimes have been your guy, but he's not really your guy. And Blake, come on, Shelley.
Well, and I mean, Jesus is the ultimate example of that.
And Jesus is the ultimate example, as you said, and that's why we get that, the hiding of the treaties.
Well, it relates wider to what Jesus actually is historically and mythologically, which this film actually gets at. And it's fucking incendiary to say it, but the film says it outright. Jesus is a mythological archetype that exists in a fundamentally human way in so many different cultures and so many different forms. And it represents something that is basically anarchistic. It's against establishment. It is not about prescription of authority. It's about the death of authority.
Yeah, and that's what, of course, Joan of Arc cries out to in the Reverend's speech. He talks about she's a witch, she's a pagan, and yet she cries out to Jesus because she's actually calling out to all. She's calling out to her village god. She's calling out to all the gods that human beings have that have haunted humanity since the dawn of time, or whatever it is he says. And those gods represent our fundamental desire to be free, to be liberated.
I mean, so much of this film is either about faith as a way to reject everything, i.e. a closed system, or faith as a way to imagine a future as a tolerant, open system. I don't like the word tolerant, but certainly open. I mean, and then brilliantly, actually, one of the great things, I think, George, you might have alluded to this slightly earlier, but just to sort of hammer the point home, I think one of the great things about it is that the film doesn't redeem Stephen totally. He doesn't just stop being a dick anymore. There's an opportunity for him to live in this sort of more pluralistic existence, to reject the fundamentalisms and the orthodoxies, recognize how much of it's rubbish. But it doesn't. And this is where I think we were saying about modern interpretations or would fall down, is this Rudkin's play doesn't totally redeem him. It allows some of the old Stephen to go on existing. It's going to be something he's going to... So in a way, the teacher's right.
Yes, absolutely. The teacher is right. That's the trap, right? That's the trap. But it's also the project of the film. this is not the end of Stephen's journey. He's still a young man. He's a teenager, and he is still going to be wrestling with his identity forever and ever and ever.
Temptation to try and stamp an ending on a contemporary version. Like, yes, well, he came out the other side. So no, the whole point is he's been given a thread through his labyrinth, but he's not through it.
And also,
he is still a boomer. Historically, we know where they went.
There is no end to this journey, right? That's the point. There's no product here. Identity is flux, ultimately. It's not a monolith. That's one of the key things the film is getting at. And that's something Stephen has to put down. It's what he has to acknowledge.
And the film ends with him walking away. What the last thing we see is him walking away, and he's walking away. There's a repeated noise in the film from both sides, as it were, about Stephen as potentially a kind of a messiah figure, as kind of a savior. And I think it's not doing the hero's journey thing so much as it's doing something about just that generation, about youth, about the hope for, and as I say, we know that didn't quite work out.
Right.
But Stephen is the mummy and daddy of England. They very much see him as their redeemer or champion or messiah or whatever it is. They see him as their ultimate victory, and it pains me to say this, but they're probably righter than anybody else. They're more on the right track in terms of how things actually turned out with that generation than the Reverend, who talks about. I mean, the Reverend obviously wonders if, because the Reverend is obviously a kind of a stealth Manichaean. He obviously you have the conversation between them earlier about the Son of Light and how you always need another one. They keep coming in an endless succession, and then you have the line about, well, who knows what you might not be capable of, and this is a metaphysical way of talking about the potentialities that there are in people, and Stephen ultimately, even after taking the blessing from Penda, he has Penda's hand on his head, and he's called the sacred demon of ungovernableness. Even from that, what you see in the end is him walking away, and that this film is wonderfully open. You can read that can be good or that can be bad. It can be him refusing to conform even to the role of the nonconformist, as it were, or it can be him ultimately, through a kind of a romantic individualism, de facto abdicating responsibility.
Yeah, it can be him surrendering too. I mean, he's walking back home. He's walking back to the village. He's ultimately going to have to go back after these days of high feverish delirium and revelation. What follows? That's something the film also begs. What follows for Stephen? What is he going to do? With his bad letter from the school and with his refusal to be part of this and part of that, what is Stephen going to do?
He talks about feeling the possibilities. He's like a particle with these unknown elements. Now that he knows he's adopted,
it's very interesting. He's a very creative and imaginative child. I mean, that's the other thing that's so interesting about the film. It operates on this wide, massive cultural, historical level, but also on a very intensely personal level.
Yeah.
I think one of the cruder readings of the film with regards to its supernatural elements is to say that it's Stephen projecting the supernatural elements onto the landscape and using them to work through his personal demons. I don't think that's a very good reading of the film myself.
I don't think so
either. It's a crude reading. There's that wonderful scene. Again, it's so quiet, but it's so brilliant. It's after he's committed one of his conscious acts of transgression, which is he's gone past the road sign, the Pinvin road sign that says no entry, and he's sat down by a pool, and we see the angel beside him by the pool before he does.
We see it's very crucially, I think, we see its reflection in the puddle. So we see it having a material effect on the world. When you see something's reflection, it is like because it is there.
It's
it is fully materially there. Light is hitting it and then bouncing off and then hitting the water. That's why you don't see vampires in mirrors, because they're not fully materially there. This thing is fully materially there.
Exactly.
and it reminds me a little bit of we talked about the Hannibal episode Coquille, and we talked about how it that wonderful moment where you see Will from the point the camera shows you Will, and it's from the point of view of the apparently hallucinatory, except maybe not, figure of the dead guy who was an angel maker, by the way.
Right.
There's several similar shots in this. You see a shot from the point of view of something that is creeping towards the house and creeping in through Stephen's window. So
right, the demon, yeah.
Whose point of view is that? If
Exactly, yeah. It is a crude reading to make that distinction, because the film doesn't make that distinction. It doesn't exist in the metaphysics. Both are true. The answer is yes. To the question either or, the answer is yes.
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 It's a jejune question, Is that really the ghost of Edward Elgar? I mean, talk about missing the point.
Missing the point entirely. Yeah, absolutely. It's a spectred isle that this film. It's the island of the romantics. Ultimately, it's the island of Blake. Blake, I mean, as we know, fully proclaimed and seemed to fully believe that he had conversations with angels and demons, constantly. Whether that was due to some sort of neurological problem on his behalf or what, or just because he had an incredibly overactive imagination, he seemed to believe that it was true. And it informed it informed everything about the man. It informed his politics, it informed his metaphysics. And again, that distinction doesn't really exist in Blake's mind, in the same way it doesn't really exist in Stephen's. Or indeed within the films.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the film doesn't foreclose upon the reality of what's actually happening with Arne's suspicion that you have nefarious conspiratorial construction going on somewhere in the area, or even under the ground in the area, some sort of nuclear shelter bunker, or a secret reactor or something. You have the young man who walks out into the field and comes back horribly burned, and then in the hospital his mother comes into the room and he's surrounded by exactly the military. It's like the television series Edge of Darkness came along a few years after that, and it's a wonderful series, but it makes an entire sort of thriller mini-series out of something that this film just throws at you in a couple of scenes and then forgets about. And and it's like, there's a suggestion, there's the conversation where Mrs. Arne talks about her husband being a paranoid, I think she says, or a I can't remember exactly what it is, but there is the possibility that he is actually kind of just a conspiracy theorist and a bit paranoid about all this stuff. It doesn't, if the kid in the field came back burned by a nuclear reactor or an electric fence or a demon, it doesn't. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because we're talking about, as you say, a haunted landscape, a landscape that is haunted by evil and by history and by forces that are completely outside of human control.
Which under reading is why they close off the road, right? The forces of conformity and the spy's imagination and romanticism don't want people to know there are demons and gods and angels. Of course, Stephen encounters that golden angel after he crosses that barrier.
The fact that it's called Penda's Fen, and Fen, very specifically defined, interconnecting strip of land with all the connotations therein. Interconnecting, it's so strong. There it's all in the title, isn't it? And then Penda is the last pagan king, the Penda of Mercia,
and it's interesting how often areas with Fenland are haunted in the British Isles. East Anglia is an area with Fenland, and East Anglia is an intensely haunted part of Great Britain. It's where M.R. James comes from.
Penda, like Elgar, is seated. Because they're both part of the land. And in one sense, Penda makes sense because he's the end of one kind of world, and Stephen is positioned at the end of this as possibly being a figure at the end of another. We're navigating fulcrums of history here, transitions, possibilities, imagined futures. And again, I know it's my hobby horse, but it's like, oh right, okay, here we've got a story about certainties coming apart in dreams and visions. We're back to Fire Walk with Me. We're back to David Lynch.
We are. We so are.
Oh, very much so. Yeah,
very much so.
It's like, this is such a rich area for me. This is like great.
I mean, one of the areas where you could come a cropper if you do try to analyze the film in very narrow terms is with regards to the gods and demons that he encounters. What exactly do they represent? Why does the angel appear to him at that point after he's made that? I think it's the first. I may be wrong, but I think it's the first time he makes a conscious transgression, where he looks at the sign blocking off the road and decides, I am walking there. I'm passing that by. And it's a kind of signal of his own ego death, isn't it? It's the death, it's the final murder, it's the final dab of those prescribed identities that he tried to cling to so shrilly at the beginning of the film. And the angel appears to him then. That's very, very interesting. In the same way that the demon appears to him when he has that luridly brilliant homoerotic dream. It's the demon, and when we use that term demon, in the same way when we use the term angel, they don't necessarily imply moral dimension either.
No.
In this film, this is much deeper. Again, it's the demons and angels of Blake and of romanticism. So it's kind of occultism in a way, mingled with a strange pantheism. That demon.
Well,
Sorry, go on, Jack.
we talked when we talked about Exorcist 3. We talked about the way the term demon has been turned into something that means, a creature of evil by Christianity. We talked about how Pazuzu, a Babylonian or Mesopotamian, I forget which, demon. That when they talked about demons, they meant spirits. They meant spirits of nature and things like that. And Christianity, in the same way that the hegemonic power that rules England has enclosed its history and enclosed its land and enclosed its markers of beauty and culture and art and so on in service of their own power. Christianity as an organized power system has done that with other people. And again, the Reverend Franklin talks about this. He says every religion that's taking over turns the old gods into demons. And the demon that's sitting on him is not antithetical to that power structure, because it's not just a demon, it's also a gargoyle. It's also, it's like a part of the church architecture that has crawled off the church. So it's the weight of that. It's not just it's not his homosexuality or his queer desire that is the nightmare hobgoblin sitting on his chest like the figure in the Fuseli painting. It's the weight of the institutionalized repression that's doing that.
Yes. And it's fascinating, isn't it, that he spells it with a kind of intimacy, he reaches up to it. In the same way that in the dream he reaches up, you look through his eyes and he's looking up at the boy, who is ironically, again, an artifact of repression, because he's the bully, right? He's the chief bully. He's the one who manifests everything that's repressive within that culture.
He also sees the face of the milk boy as well, though, doesn't he? On the face,
he does.
Who's interesting because he's kind, and he makes it clear at one point when he senses Stephen's attraction. He says, "I'm not into this," but he's not nasty to Stephen.
No, he isn't.
He's quite nice to him, really.
Given the the standards of the era and the positioning of homosexuality, no, he isn't.
Yeah.
He firmly rejects him.
But then he waves as he drives off. It's
it's interesting, isn't it? Because you see that all the way through. Again, you have that reaction from Stephen's parents early on, where they're like, "Oh, well, yeah, he's obviously attracted to the milk boy, and it's no big deal." It's just again, I want to be a fly on the wall watching families watch this in 1974. I want to know what the reaction is. I cannot. I mean, to me here now, seeing it, it's incendiary. I just can't think of any other word for it.
The best case scenario in my mind is like ordinary people watch that. It comes up on Play for Today, and they sit there sort of with this look on their face like, huh? But they sit there and watch the whole thing, and it gets to the end, and Mum goes and puts the kettle on, and Dad says, I don't know what the bloody hell that was all about. But everybody's thinking about it for the next few days.
Yeah, it's that classic.
And they remember it.
It's that classic thing which I've said before, but the David Lynch thing about about going to the cinema to see one of his films, and that they come out at the end and it's a couple and they go to a diner, or they go for a drink at a bar, and the guy starts pontificating and mansplaining, and the young woman he's taken out on the date, who has said to herself, I don't understand what I've just watched, but soon as he starts pontificating and mansplaining, oh, you're wrong. She knows he's wrong, and it's that same thing that you've just illustrated, Jack. It is that people would have, and of course our way of watching television, our way of consuming television was so different then, because the idea of channel hopping, or the likelihood is that people would have watched to the end, regardless of whether they were feeling slightly hostile towards it, or perplexed, or bemused, angry, or whatever. But and you think about it for days afterwards. It's quite funny. I watched it thinking, isn't it extraordinary how much? And as a screenplay, I can understand why it was. It picked up the kudos it did, but it's like there was a lot of kind of backslapping on the release of the film. Call Me by Your Name from a few years ago. It's like it's basically Penda's Fen over-explained.
right. So Penda's Fen murdered, right? It's
exactly, and then Penda's Fen brings in the metaphysical, the symbolic, the magical elements, the ambiguities, and it's it's miles away because of course. Call Me by Your Name is a film from now, therefore it is over-explained and it is prescribed, and it also has the great problem in that one of its stars is now such a let's say a problem, to stop me swearing, that now we cannot even watch it in good faith.
Right. Okay.
I've never heard of this. I don't know anything about it. What is it?
I don't either.
It's kind of a similar sort of thing in that it's about a young man, a teenager who has a homosexual awakening, and it's sort of but there are sort of like dreamlike qualities to it. I mean, it's not. It's not as sophisticated as Penda's Fen.
Right. But then what is?
By any stretch. But by any stretch. But it did. When I was watching Penda's Fen, I thought, oh right, this is sort of it's stirring up thoughts of something else. But of course, that's the very legitimate way of doing that kind of narrative now in a modern film. As we've discussed, it's too tidy, it's too explained. It's got one very interesting thing actually, though. But I then found out that I think the director or the screenwriter actually downplayed it, which was the film is set, I think, 1980 dead on, and the young character who is having the sexual awakening, played by Timothy Chalamet. Starts getting this. He starts having this nosebleed, and then later he's violently sick. And I kept thinking, because I know how films play out and how a lot of modern media plays, I said, "Oh God, he's unwell. He's got the start of something." But it wasn't that at all. And so I thought, oh, I know what. Oh right, I see. It's a kind of thing. It's 1980. It's where things could lead for a lot of young men in this era because of HIV and AIDS. Right. And it's a sort of just like gentle signifier of no, it was completely played down. So it was like it even took away its own slightly surreal or fantastical elements were played down in sort of post interviews. It's like, oh, so why did he have those nosebleeds, and why did he have that? He just did. But it was literally just thrown. Oh, he just did. It's like you can't say that post Chekhov, guys. It doesn't work.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Have you guys seen the interviews about what inspired Penda's Fen, like the incident that inspired Penda's Fen?
No, I
No,
don't
oh,
know
it's
that.
so interesting. You know the sequence where Stephen corrects the guy who's painting the road sign.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That was it. That is an actual recreation of what happened to David Rudkin's wife. She was driving home, saw this road sign that was being painted, and it was spelled wrong. And when she just idly spoke about it when she got home, and he ran with it. It just did something in his head. He ran with
Boy,
it.
did he run with it!
Right. And apparently, that I mean, you can tell from the finished product, but the writing of it was all very wild and very out of sequence, and there was no like natural flow through as such. It was just like scenes that were then thrown together, and then little interconnecting bits were written. It's wildly experimental in terms of its writing, and
you do get a sense that if you were to just in one's own home using one's own computer re-edit this in a completely different way, it would still resonate. It would still have that, it's got that non-linear quality. It's got, that it is, dreamlike and so on. But the fact that it is not lashed to a linear narrative really amplifies that sense of magic and bursting through of ideas. And but again, very astonishing for television then, because of course television has to work on a so much more democratic level than film,
right?
Because everyone's gathered around it, and they go off and make cups of tea or whatever. Television's got such a different ethos to it.
Well, I think
not
even
so
like
much
10
now,
years
but more
later.
so then, with the that kind of Arethian thing and everything. Whereas with film, you could still push the envelope a bit more, but the fact that things like this turn up on TV, and although Penda's Fen is an extraordinary example, it's not by no means unique for its era. As we've said many times, the 60s and 70s in particular, and even going into the 80s, is peppered with this kind of stuff.
And it does make one sad, doesn't it? Because there's not much like it around these days. Not in the mainstream anyway.
I know I'm a bloody broken record, but it's the market distorting things. The great thing about television television is inherently, or at least used to be anyway, it kind of just inherently wasn't marketized,
right?
And of course, it was to a huge extent, ad breaks and sponsorship and all that sort of thing, and television companies want to win the battle for ratings because they want to get the advertisers to pay, of course. But especially, I mean, in this area, even the commercial channels, but especially the BBC, it was so much less a question of markets. If you wanted to make a film and get anybody to see it, people have to actively choose to come out of their home and go to the cinema and pay to go in and sit and watch it. So you have to have, there's just that, and it doesn't stop cinema having great work, of course, but you need to have an enticing trailer and you need to have an enticing poster, and you need to do something that makes people choose it as a commodity. Television, so much less so now, because we've had decades of vested interests chipping away at the democratic and non-market model of just television coming into your home. But that's how it used to be. It used to be just a box in the corner of your of your room, and it would offer you. It would come into your home and it would offer you. We have this. Do you want to watch this? We have this. Do you want to watch this? And it wouldn't always, especially, as I say, especially on the BBC. I mean, you mentioned the ethos of Arethianism. Arethianism is elitist and establishment and all that sort of stuff, but it had a core of non-market content, which was the idea that it needs to provide for everybody, and it's not. It needs to provide nutrition rather than just calories, if you know what I mean. The space was there. The space was there for something like this. And of course, the BBC was this great hoover for generations that sucked in creative, intelligent, artistic people in Britain as this space this non-market space where there was a degree, and there was all sorts of things wrong with it. Don't get me wrong. This is the institution that sheltered Jimmy Savile for decades.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
produced God knows what, torrents of dreck. Nowhere, it's just wall to wall dreck now. But even then, light entertainment was just fucking sewage. That was, but there was a space in it for stuff like this to be made, and occasionally, and so much more than now, it would just come into your living room and offer you something like this. And because the culture was different, people who would never dream of going to the cinema to see an art house movie, because this was there coming into their lives, offering itself to them, they might sit and watch it.
Yeah, and I think that's the wider beauty of something like Penda Sven. It comes into people's living rooms, and it regardless of what your class happens to be or what you've been exposed to, it allows you to experience these ideas and these images, and it opens you up. I can see so many creative, young, imaginative creatives seeing this. When they were kids, when they were teenagers,
delighted in it as well. It seems such an incidental thing, but it does tap into what you were saying there, Jack, about the market and so on. It's such a collection of fascinating faces, fascinating looking actors. They're all so deeply fascinating looking. I mean, there's faces in there of the like I've never seen before. Or it's like his father's got the most extraordinary, watchable face. He has. I mean, Spencer Banks is not a typical young male lead by today's standards. He has got such an interesting face. I mean, it's
just so
would be allowed near mainstream viewing now.
What he's doing with it, where he is pensive and he's insular and he's often not looking at the camera. He's not, he's looking elsewhere. It's so interesting.
Yeah,
such a fascinating focus.
And Ian Hogg as well, another actor with a really interestingly unusual. It's just littered with character actors and character. And by that I cover all genders. It's an incidental thing, but it's like, wow, it's just so wonderful to watch these really interesting looking people rather than just a sort of sea of catalogue models.
What I would love to hear from are the young people for whom this could have been particularly young men for whom this could have been their awakening. This could have been their sexual awakening.
I wonder how many millions of viewers this got. I mean, it's in the public domain. It might be. I mean, it's BBC Two. I think it was a Play Video Day. But even if it got 2 million viewers or 3 million viewers, which of course is extraordinary by today's standards, but was kind of low then. But for the time it went out and the channel it went out and everything, and in amongst that were however many hundreds of thousands, if not a million, young guys. I mean, that was extraordinary.
Things punched above their weight as well culturally back then.
Yeah,
because of what is sometimes called, a little problematically, sometimes called the monoculture. I mean, 1 million viewers, 2 million viewers. That back then, that could make it a national conversation. Because
that was pretty astounding, right?
Yeah, we're just absolutely. These days, we are just constantly swimming in culture all the time. It is just beyond mass produced. The event horizons are just too fast. Way too fast.
And that, of course, makes it almost impossible to process. It's just coming
exactly
too thick.
Exactly.
And much of it is slush. Much of it is just slush.
Yeah, that too. Yeah,
I did have the misfortune of watching Beetlejuice recently, and my God. By the way, guys, another film we need to talk about, the original one.
Because that original film exists in such an interesting place insofar as it was a kind of mainstream Hollywood movie, and it's such an incredibly odd film.
Weird.
It's so incredibly strange.
So weird. So weird.
Yeah. So the idea of seeing it sort of turned into a franchise, and now
which is exactly what
I know. I can't.
Trying to do.
I can't do it.
I haven't seen it. I don't plan to see it. I can imagine it in my head. I know it. I've never seen it, and I never will. But I know that film. I know what it will be. It will be slavishly, quote unquote, loyal to the aesthetics of the original film. It will copy the stop motion animation and the surrealist style, and so of the makeup and the monster designs and so on. And yet everything will be sanitized.
Yep.
And
that's exactly it.
Completely safe.
That's exactly it. I mean, one of the big tells in it is that, okay, yeah, there are changes in costume, but Beetlejuice almost exclusively appears in his white and black striped suit. Why? Because that's what people remember. Because that's how he appeared on the VHS cover and on the posters, right?
Yeah.
It's as you say, everything. It's sanitized. It doesn't understand what made the original film so interesting. That quirky, weird, out there, transgressive nature that it had, in terms of not only its imagery but the structure of its storytelling, which was all over the fucking place and weird and odd. It's got no heart. It's got no soul at all.
It's kind of, I mean, although this is a much more, it is a somewhat more superficial comparison, but it's kind of the similar thing that happened with Ghostbusters, in the sense that what made Ghostbusters, again, a very mainstream movie, what made it crackle was the fact that it was a kids movie made by the people behind Saturday Night Live. That's a really weird combination. Those two things don't go together, and a lot of the Saturday night humor of the early 80s, late 70s bleeds through it. It's a similar thing, funnily enough.
It's simultaneously a Saturday Night Live sketch, a kids' adventure movie, a sex comedy, and a horror film.
Film.
Exactly. And it's a similar thing to
that's the sort of thing that happened in the 1980s.
Yeah, but also it's the interesting thing about the way sometimes things were imported into this country as well. Because I remember when I was a kid, like very, very young, I think it was Saturday morning. Saturday morning, they used to show episodes of Mork and Mindy, with Robin Williams, because the BBC's idea with that was, well, this is a guy who comes to Earth in an egg, and he's got, it's all very silly. It must be a kids program, and in fact, it's a light sex comedy. It's really quite racy.
It's very funny,
very anarchic, and
but odd, but you have a similar thing happening with like the introduction of anime into the UK, where they just don't know what to do with it, because of course in the 1980s and 1990s, cartoons were the purview of children. So if a cartoon existed, it existed for children. As a result of which, you get this very odd thing where you get anime that are very fucking adult, and I mean very fucking adult.
Well, you've got full-on sex scenes and
violence, evisceration,
and sexual
monsters,
violence as
horror, and chopped up and then put onto children's programming.
Yeah, so peculiar.
Oddest thing.
And yet you'd think, because of things like Watership Down and Plague Dogs, we'd kind of realise that. It's
fucking
not
Plague Dogs. I mean, Watership Down is one thing, but at least that has some.
Yeah, Plague Dogs is kind of hold our pint, isn't it?
Plague Dog. Jesus Christ. Now, there's a film I never want to see again.
No, that'll do.
I mean, don't get me wrong, it's good. It's a great film. It does exactly what it intends. It's like 110% successful, that film.
Yeah. 110%. Whereas I can and have gone back to Watership Down. I haven't gone back. Yeah.
Oh, it's genius. It's beautiful.
If only for the wonderful story behind Angela Morley's music. The fact that she was, I think the original music fell through, and she was just almost this random person who was like an amateur composer, and it was like they were up against it. And they said, well, would you score the film? And she was like,
my God,
quite a way down in her 70s, if not nearly 80, when she scored that. And it's a beautiful score. It's almost like Vaughan Williams-esque, isn't it?
It's absolutely beautiful score. My God!
And of course, it put her on the map.
Wow!
It immortalized her.
I reread that earlier this year. Watership Down, and oh my God! If there is, there's no such thing as a perfect created thing, but fucking hell, if it's something that gets close to it, it's so beautiful.
I think it was one. Possibly.
Very big influence on me, that book.
Very
big influence.
Beautiful.
I read that.
I can't get over it.
The novel I'm trying to write is very heavily influenced by that.
Just the names alone. From a writer's perspective, the names just get me. Ella Khera.
Yeah.
Oh my God! Just say it. Say it makes me feel good. It's beautiful.
Really great.
Beautiful.
I mean, the novel is is fantastic. I mean, but I do really like that adaptation as well. I think that.
Me too. Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
It's a stunning adaptation. It really is. It's so and very very close to the book as well. There is very little that's in the book that's not in the film.
It's interesting because I was obsessed with the film as a very young child. I mean, like I would watch it again and again and again. Even used to make me feel incredibly sad.
Yes, I think most of our generation were. We really, at that point, we hadn't really seen cartoons like that.
No, and then I think I was about 8 when 8, maybe 9 when the novel came. When I finally sort of, this is the novel, and I remember just like. It was one of those occasions as a child where people were literally trying to take the book out of your hand and said, "No, you've got to brush your teeth and go to bed now," and things like that. It was properly lost in it, you know.
It's next level. I mean, it's just on a purely technical level. It is one of the most beautifully written books I've ever come across.
Oh yeah, I agree.
In fact, I was reminded of it last Christmas because. I was told off like this thing about when you have a book and you just like I've just got to keep going. I've got to keep going. And I was not so much told off, but told I was being a little bit antisocial last Christmas because last Christmas I decided to reread Richard Matheson's Legend of Hell House because it's a Christmas novel.
Oh my God! Wow!
And
it is.
It's a Christmas novel, and of course. Once I was plugged into it, I kept sort of sneak reading it, and it's like we had family around and all this kind of thing. Can you put that book down? I said, I can't. Sorry. I know I've read it before, but I've got to read it again.
Oh my God! I mean, just to segue back to Penda's Fen,
so
a novel
sorry,
you kind of got it. No. This is, it's the nature of the beast. Everybody out there knows this is it's like a spiraling intertwined knotted hydra of a podcast. This one, but one of the books that really, I mean, I have to wonder because Clive Barker would have been an older teenager when this hit. So I have to wonder if he must have seen this. He must have. I mean, his novel Sacraments is thematically so similar to this. It evokes so much of the same energy and inspiration.
I've yet to get to it.
Honestly, so, I would that one. It's one of the least.
That's about the one with the guys in the coma, isn't it? Sacrament.
No, Sacrament is about the. It's about a chap named Will Rabjohns who is a gay man. He's a gay man in the 1980s. Yeah,
but doesn't he end up in a coma? Or
no,
he's not the photographer, is it? The photographer.
He's a photographer. Yeah.
Oh right. Okay. Right.
Yeah, he doesn't end up in a coma though. He meets when he's a kid. He meets.
I must be thinking of another book. Just intertwining with this.
Yeah. He meets this very odd couple of people: a man named Jacob Steep and a woman named Rosa McGee, and they're very unusual in a very Barkerian way. They seem to almost be like archetypes of the male and the female, almost like demigods of those principles. But they've learned what is male and female in all of those aspects. So the positive, the negative, all of them. And these characters sort of haunt his life all the way through. It's so interesting.
I've got to reread this. I do remember reading it, but a while ago. I mean, it's 90s, isn't it? When I would have probably read it around the time it was released.
It's a stunning piece of work, but just like Penda's Fen, it elevates the conversation around queerness and homosexuality. It's this thing where Barker says, "You know what? I'm not interested in the prescribed talking points or the parameters of conversation that our enemies define for us, which we often do that. We make that grand mistake. We often do that. We operate within those parameters.
Yes, saying it's their Blake, it's their Shakespeare, it's their Elgar, and it's the remote. Actually,
it places ours in this.
No, it's ours.
It places us in this petty defensive position where we're trying to justify ourselves all the time. Where Barker says, "No, I'm not going to do that. Fuck off. I'm going to talk about what a joy it is and how it allows you to operate in ways and with regards to narratives that are ostensibly denied to our straight and cisgender cousins, how we can write our own narratives in a way that maybe at the time they couldn't. It's so fascinating. It's so fascinating and well worth a read. But it marries very well with Penda's Fen.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Barker usually is fascinating. I just want to say on the subject of Richard Matheson's Hell House, I love that book just because I love the idea of like somebody saying, like, I always imagine it as like a pitch meeting. Matheson is pitching the book to himself in some sort of metaphysical way, and his pitch is like, imagine Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House, but really, really schlocky, with loads and loads of sex. Sign me up.
That is absolutely that's so on the nose. That's so on the button, rather. That's great. Yeah, because that is exactly it.
Honestly, if you want to sell that book, so that is probably it's a good blurb.
Haunting of Hill House as well. That is such an amazing novel.
Oh, I
could just dip back into that. If someone, do you want to reread that again? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
it's one of those books that I reread regularly. Like,
it's incredible.
Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Great Expectations. I read A Haunting of Hill House. I'd say at least once every couple of years. I mean, I love Richard Matheson. I love pretty much all his books. I love his short stories, even though most of them are kind of bad. I just love his writing voice. I just love this sort of pulp magazine, just bursting with ideas. And 8 out of 10 of the ideas are kind of stupid, but they just keep coming at you.
Such
enthusiasm. Is just, and it's great. It's just you're glad someone goes there, and I do that kind of thing. I just had my. It's funny that you say Great Expectations. I've just done my every year. I do Dickens December, and it's quite funny this year because I'm sort of. I've reread the ones I love, which is Great Expectations, Hard Times, Bleak House, but I'm now getting down to the ones that I've always gone. Nah, I'm not sure I'm going to read that. So this year was Dombey and Son, which I've never read before. But I was quite amused by how he starting to he recycles whole events from other novels.
Oh yes,
the death of Carker is that's old Curiosity Shop right there. Just it's a great sequence, and and the wonderful thing about is how he throws away the death of Carker in about 4 lines. That you have to reread it because you don't realize he's been hit by a train immediately. all you get is he stood somewhere and he sees Dombey coming towards him, and he steps back, and then there's this description of his body being tossed up into the air by windmills that rent him limb from limb after he sees 2 red eyes come out of the fog, and it's like that's steam. It's a train lights, and the windmills are the wheels of it. You've got to piece it together, but it's actually really effective. It's like, he's backed onto a train line. He's backed onto a railway line, but it doesn't spell it out at all. So it's a really good tip. He does it in 4 lines. And Dickens not being one necessarily.
I was going to say, yes, tight, paid compact, by the word.
Yeah, and it's probably one of my favourite just random pieces of Dickens. Is you don't really know what's happened until you literally reread it, and then you say, "Oh, it's a train. He's been diced by a train." But it's actually a really good, effective sequence.
I never thought of it that way before, but you're absolutely right. As the more you get into Dickens, the more more you get into what do I mean? His later books is what I'm talking about. You keep on getting passages that anticipate early 20th century modernism, and they seem to just sort of pop in out of nowhere, don't they?
Yeah. And I mean, one thing I was really quite taken. I mean, the character of Edith Granger just had me cheering. I mean, it's a particular kind of Dickens novel. It's pulling a lot on things like, well, in fact, it pulls an awful lot on Old Curiosity Shop with the boy, the son, and the death of Little Nell and things like that. But it's the character of Edith Granger is just Punch the Air brilliant, where she leaves him for the villain of the piece, and you think, oh god, this poor woman, jumps out of the frying pan into the mire, but she actually manipulates both of them, and she gets away in the end. And it's pretty. He comes towards her with a knife, and she says, "I've told my husband where I am," even though that's the person she most fears. And you're there as a reader going, "Why the fuck have you done that?" But it's to but she has an escape route planned, and then he backs onto the train track. It's so brilliant. She just basically crushes these two men who are these sort of edifices of Victorian patriarchy, who are so powerful, and she just gets the better of them and escapes. And it's like, yes.
It's rough going in the middle, that book.
It is, because
especially after Paul dies, it's very rough going. But I love the way sort of what is it? The euphemism is old fashioned, isn't it? Paul is old fashioned.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, you realise that what people mean by that is, this kid's gonna die.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just amazing. Everybody knows.
Your Oscar Wilde moment where you go, only a heart of stone could not crack up when Paul dies.
But it's the bit where the gravestone where it says "beloved only child."
Yeah. Oh, it's so raw, that is, and she's
what
there.
The fuck?
Yeah. The absolute horror of the moment when he says to Edith, if you get closer to my daughter, who I've already rejected and can't stand, but if you get closer to her and show her affection, I will make her life even worse. And it's like, whoa. And of course, Dickens being Dickens redeems him. And it's like, no, don't redeem.
But that does actually segue very neatly into something that I wanted to talk about, which is that we said, I believe, that we were going to do the Mask of the Red Death, the Corman movie, The Mask of the Red Death, as our Christmas special. Now, I think realistically, I don't know. I mean, we can try if you gentlemen want to, but I don't know realistically if we're going to be able to get that done before Christmas.
Yeah.
It's
snuck up a bit.
So assuming, it has a bit. It really has. So assuming not, I think we should do it. I think we should do it next. But it'll probably be arriving somewhere between for the listeners. Be arriving somewhere between Christmas and New Year's. So that makes this episode into our Christmas episode, effectively. Which, if you think about it,
rather well. It's a pagan.
Is actually kind of apt because it's a story about a total asshole who is visited by a series of spirits, and then his personality is changed.
You're right. So our Dickens segue now makes sense.
And to tie a bow on it, Spencer Banks, who plays Stephen, he appears in the 1984 version of A Christmas Carol.
With George
He plays Dick Wilkins in that, opposite Mark Strickson as the young Scrooge.
That's it. It's George C. Scott. Yes.
I was going to say, is that the Scott one? Yeah, I like that.
Yes.
I love that version.
I do like that one.
Yeah.
That's probably my favourite version for all its faults. It's probably because it's the one I grew up with. But he's in
occasional showings of the 70s Michael Hordern one. I always seem to remember as well.
Oh, yes.
The BBC one. That was
that's the thing I remember most about that is that it's incredibly compressed. I think it's only like half an hour long, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really short.
They squidge it right down into half an hour.
Almighty, how do you do that? Jesus.
I don't know. Well,
cutting out most of it, presumably.
The thing is, next year I realise if I'm going to keep this Dickens tradition up, which obviously I've kept up for 13 years because that's so many novels there are, or something like that, is I've got to do one again. There's 3 I've never read. Now it's 2, and next year it's really going to have to be Barnaby Rudge, which I've been like really desperately trying to avoid. It's that terrible thing you do to yourself. It's like, I must read certain things before I die. Even if you don't want to do it, it's like I gotta just grit my teeth and go through it. Yeah.
I've gotten a lot more relaxed as I've gotten older. I've gotten a lot more relaxed about getting a certain amount of way into a book and saying, nah, fuck this. And I'm afraid there are several Dickens novels that I've got
I did most
part
of
the way in.
I did most of the biggies
Barnaby
in my
Rudge.
in my teens and 20s. So I always feel like I'm past the point of having to worry so much anymore, because I did really try and compress a lot of biggies, like the Russians and everything, and a lot of the great works of English literature into that period of about like 15 to 30. So I've now know I don't have to go back to a lot of this, which is actually making me feel much more liberated. I never have to do Les Miserables again.
I actually find it kind of stunning, the amount of reading that I did in my 20s. Like I could not do that now. I read so much. Sometimes I kind of but sometimes I kind of think, did I read Anna Karenina? I'm sure I did.
The only reason I know is that because I've got that kind of brain, is that I
reading.
Kept lists of. I don't do it anymore, but up until I was about 35, I used to keep lists of everything I'd read and everything I'd watched and everything I'd listened to in terms of music. And one of the fascinating things about that is across those years is how awful my handwriting became, number one. But also it's like, what do I do with this? It's just a list that I'm never going to look at again. So I stopped doing it. Although I still have those, but I haven't written these kinds of lists for years. I got better, Doctor. But yeah, and but I used to set myself a terrible thing, which was I'd read so much in a year and go, right, next year I'm going to beat that in terms of quantity, which is such an odd way to behave. But it's like, right, well, if I'd read this X amount of books this year, I'm going to read X plus next year.
Brilliant.
Like, it's crazy. But
what's depressing is
my actual
you look back
pace of reading is slower now. I still read all the time because it's kind of in my DNA. I've never not a book, but the actual pushing through matter has got slower.
Yeah, likewise. I do remember a period, and it was that sort of early 20s period when I walked to university, I would walk past a bookshop, so I would go in, I would buy whatever caught my eye, which is often a lot more than I should have. And there were days when I would read those books in a day.
Yeah, and I wonder if actually part of the reason that I read at a slower pace might be something to do with being older, but I suspect it is also to do with my day job, because even when I read in my head, I read at the pace that I read aloud. And of course that is really slow, because of course you have an audience. You have really got to get that down and get everything. And so I think I must do one page for what would have been every 4 or 5 years ago now. I literally read at a slower pace, even in my head.
I definitely read as I get through. So, I mean, this is it. I look back on the rate at which I used to read, and in my early 20s at university, it'd be like, it's just staggering. And it's kind of likewise. It's a double-edged sword, because it's a wonderful time. I mean, I look back on those years with a fair amount of thankfulness that they're over in many respects. But one of the things that I do look back upon my young years with a lot of fondness for is just that wonderful experience reading just these amazing books for the first time, reading Catch 22 for the first time. And it's great in one respect, but also I can't help but suspect that just cramming so much of it in such a short space of time, I can't possibly have enjoyed some of this or assimilated it as much as I should have done.
Right.
Yes. This is why there's certain things, the things that I actually enjoyed, or they engaged me in some way or impressed me some way. Of course, I ended up rereading, and I think I said to you, Jet, that I went through a real phase over the last few years of having to reread things that I actually admired or liked from my young years, because maybe for that very reason, it's like I can't really remember much detail, and I can't remember what my actual feelings or thoughts were about it, so I've had to pick them up again.
Yes, likewise. I'm doing that at the moment, actually. I mean, I did that earlier this year with Nabokov, with Lolita, and it was fascinating.
I mean, Pale Fire is. I mean,
Pale
is
Fire.
an
Well, I
extraordinary
picked that up on your guys' say so. That was fucking that Nabokov is one of those annoyingly brilliant writers.
awful
I mean,
fucking politics, but I mean, what a writer.
Annoying brilliant.
Yeah.
But then that came back to what we were talking about last time about the projection from the right. It's like, I mean, I love a lot of Nabokov, but I don't like him.
No. Jorge Luis Borges is another example. Dreadful politics.
Dreadful.
One of my favorite writers.
Oh, Ficciones is. I mean, my God.
I mean, you've got to give
bits of that rather like watching Penda's Fen. I mean, Penda's Fen was such a fascinating because I've only ever seen Penda's Fen twice. I watched it about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. It was recommended to me. I can't even remember who recommended it, to be honest. And I remember really loving it at the time. But this time, and I was watching it with Vicky, and we were almost out of our sofa by the end.
Well,
I noticed that we were both sat bolt upright, and we were fizzing. We were like fizzing with
this time round. I was stalking up and down my place. I was walking up and down after finishing, stalking up and down my place, talking to myself because I just could not. I could not process what I'd just seen.
I was just in floods of tears this time because this is like I watched it for this podcast. Last week, because we were originally going to record last week and then we couldn't for various reasons, and that would have been, I think, like the third time I've ever seen it. I saw it in the 90s because somebody had videotaped it when it was on Channel 4 in the early 90s. And they gave me their video copy, their VHS copy, and I made my own copy of it. So I had sort of a home recorded VHS copy of the one time it was repeated on Channel 4.
Yes, it was 1990, wasn't it?
1990. Yeah. And somebody had taped it, and friend of mine, I think at university, so it would have been like 97, something like that, gave me their VHS and their home recording. So I made a copy of that and watched it and loved it. It's what I'm talking about. It's those years where you just hoover everything in and you're not actually taking it in as much as you should do, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and there's so much expected of you to take in, isn't it?
A couple of times before this, put it on last week, just absolutely, my brain was dribbling out of my nose. I was just, what the fuck is this? Is amazing. It instantly became one of my favorite movies.
Totally.
Yeah, likewise.
Film, but
it's a film. It doesn't matter that this is for the small screen. This is one of the greatest films of all time.
It is. Yeah. We've done so much complex material in
Masterpiece.
this podcast. We've done so much, and guns ahead, I think, in terms of what speaks to me on a very intimate level and which has blown the parameters of my mind wide open, Penda's Fen is got to be it.
But it's at the point you made earlier, George, I mean, because you said it's complex, which it is. But what is fascinating about it is it's complex but not complicated.
Yes.
It's got a very... It's simultaneously very, very accessible. It wants you inside it is probably the way I would describe it. It wants you in there with it. It's not repelling you. It's not cold or remote, but it is complex. It's like it is pulling out the differences. It almost sounds like just semantics, but it's not. It's pulling out the difference between complexity. Complication's easy. I think almost any writer can do complication. Complexity.
Well, it's the default. It's the default style for quote unquote serious television drama. It's It's what I call the Netflixification of narrative art. Everything is now complicated in that sense, in that sort of.
But it's often obfuscation, isn't it? It's like there's nothing underneath.
Well, it's removing
what they call plot blocking.
Yeah, it's removing, if your plot is A, B, C, D, E, it's removing B, C, and D to put in, but not actually leaving you with any information or clues or foreshadowing or things that you can use it's just completely removed. And then it's put into a later episode as a kind of prestige.
And,
there you go.
Or you've got A, B, C, D, and then you've got B2, B3, B4, B5, C1, C2, C3.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
so it pulls. I think
it's
probably why I got this. Now I come to think of it, probably why I saw it 10 years ago. I certainly didn't see it in the 90s, but
oh God, no.
Was
I'd have been too young.
I would have been 14.
Well, I would have been.
1992.
Yeah, I mean, a bit younger, but
I was a little bit too young to be paying attention to stuff like this in 1990.
Yeah, likewise, a little bit. But, a little bit.
Probably because I saw it first, probably because I was going through Rudkin's plays or something. And of course, Clarke's other, I mean, this is nothing like anything else Clarke did. It's so staggeringly not like Alan Clarke's other things.
I'm not actually a big fan of Alan Clarke, I have to admit.
It's just that thing of like, oh, well, it's kind of like, as you say, hoovering up the cultural artifacts. It's like, well,
yeah.
He's this seminal director. I better, so I've definitely seen a lot of his things, but no, I agree with you. They're not exactly my wheelhouse, to be honest. But seeing this strange marriage of Rudkin and Clarke, it's a really odd combination
weird magic
of
it's alchemy,
artists. Really, they're not obvious bedfellows. And I love the fact that Clarke was honest enough to admit, I don't know what the hell it was I was doing, but I was kind of fascinated by it, even though I didn't understand a blind word of it, because somehow that works. Because Rudkin clearly has such a big grasp of what he's doing in terms of its subtext and so on, that actually giving it up to someone who's like, I'm not fully sure, kind of works for
it does.
For
it lets it operate on this dream level, doesn't it? On this very intense, immediate level.
It doesn't feel over controlled.
Which is it's so to its benefit. It works on that level. It's a style of storytelling which I fucking love, but I rarely come across. And I feel like such an old man, but I rarely come across it these days in any medium, not just TV or cinema, but in any medium. I think, as Jack was saying earlier, the marketplaces have smothered it. They've murdered it.
Yeah.
It's
a kind of impressionism, really.
Yes, it is.
Just
it's
get
a kind of impressionism. Yes.
Essences and yeah.
I mean, and I'm always going to go for that because I'm an impressionistic writer. That's it's
surrealism in the best sense. Surrealism is very much a movement with radical and reactionary wings. You have the reactionary wing represented by somebody quintessentially Dali, and
of course
you have the radical wing represented by Louis Buñuel, for instance. And this is or André Breton, obviously talking about him earlier, Elliot. This is surrealism in that radical sense that I personally absolutely treasure. It's central to my Gothic aesthetic and political sensibilities. It's absolutely,
and this is why
how.
Reading Benjamin's work on Breton earlier in the year, it's like, this is it. Here it is. This is exactly what he's talking about. This kind of thing.
It's
so
how
exciting.
I understand the world. I don't know about you guys, but it's the language that it describes, the way that Stephen perceives the world in this haunted, ambiguous way, where it's material overlaid with the abstract, or rather flowing into the abstract, giving birth to the abstract. It's kind of how I understand the world.
And it's so thrilling on a personal level as well, because this is where my parents live. So I know those lanes that he cycles around so well, and they didn't always live there because we're originally from Devon, but about 7 years ago they decided to move there, and I try and see them as often as I can, so I know that area really well now, and all those lanes that he was cycling down, and it does have something so wonderful about it because of its history and because of the all the mythology attached to it and everything. But we've done so many really long walks around there. It's just like, so it was really thrilling on a personal level to watch it and go, oh, I forgot it was set here. I forgot this is where it. And like, oh yeah, I think I know where that is. Doing that every couple of moments. Yeah.
I live in a part of the country where there are there is so much evidence of ancient peoples. I live in a part of the country where there are long barrows and hill forts and stone circles and things like that, and I've come to be so much more attuned to that as I've gotten older. As I've lived in this part of the world, and so I was a younger person. I always thought of myself as fundamentally a city person, and I've come to understand the attraction of living in places that have been human habitations for literally millennia.
Yes,
I live fairly near an abbey that is literally more than 1,000 years old. People have worshipped in that spot for 1,000 years, and that feeling of connection to generations of people who lived and died and worshipped and thought before you, and who are in some sense your family, your ancestors. That is incredibly powerful, and it is one of those things that is, I think you have to be careful with trans-historical generalizations about human nature, but I think there are such things as trans-historical traits of people. And I think one of them is that sense of not necessarily worship of the ancestors, but consultation with the ancestors, knowledge of them, communion, traffic with them in some sense. We're in Samhain at the moment in the extended sense. It's part of that, and it's another one of those things that modernity is part of what Penda's talking about. Modernity has simultaneously erased that from us, certainly in the kind of places we live, the Western developed capitalist imperial center. These things have been erased from us. We've been, in a sense, deracinated. And then simultaneously, the opposite process has taken place where we have been we've been made hyper aware of a kind of a fake constructed idea of our heritage, which, if you take it to its extreme, you end up with things like, extreme nationalism and volkishness and stuff like that. And it's all to do, it's all to do with, it's that concept of enclosure again. What they've done is the ruling system has enclosed our ancestors and turned them against us in the same way that it turns the things that we do, and the things that the capitalist system does that. It turns the things that we make and the things that we do against us, makes them hostile.
Literally says there are holes in the world that you can blast through this enclosure, this conservation, this gentrification, this taming by these forces, these hegemonic forces, that it just ruptures through. And again, back to the surrealists, back to Andre Breton. It's there. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, modernity is sort of pockmarked. It's like, Swiss cheese, there's holes in it. And you can, sometimes it's not a crevasse that you fall into. Sometimes the chasm is one that you make, and it's constructive. You can literally crack open the church and release the energies inside it. And you can let the appropriated Christ, the stolen Christ, who is this radical, revolutionary, liberatory principle. You can let him out of the tree. You can, and at the same time, you can talk to King Penda, who is he's the last non-Christian king. So on one hand, you have I love how this film says two things at once, and it's still a continuous thought, because on the one hand, you have part of what is important about Penda is that he's fighting the encroaching of a new system, the conquest of his world by a new system, which is Christianity, and that's noble. And this film constructs it that way. But at the same time, this film is not anti-Christian, because what it's showing you is an alternative revolutionary Christianity, a revolutionary Christ, and that too has been smothered. So it's showing you that ultimately the problem isn't one faith conquering another. Ultimately, the problem is any sort of system of power that wants to smother and enclose and control. And the fact that it shows you that through. Yeah, and rewrite. Yeah, absolutely. As indeed the name Penda's Fen becomes rewritten over time to Penfin and then Pinfin and then Pinvin. That's absolutely crucial to it, and it's that is the connection, actually, isn't it? Because that's the place name. So we're talking about history being rewritten. The place name, that's the connection to the landscape, the English landscape. So you follow the language backwards through time. You reconnect with the landscape, the historical reality of it, and you reach out to it and you reach into it, and you can find, if not necessarily historical truth, then certainly an openness to think beyond these imposed categories.
Certainly
kind of
appropriate
mythological
on.
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, it's
certainly
beautiful.
appropriate today as well. Having podcasting with you guys with Penda's Fen on the day that I connected on Blue Sky with the writer of a book that I did the audiobook for last year.
Huh.
I mean, it's my day job, so very often I just get the material and I do it, and then it doesn't leave a trace. But I did have this one book by an academic called Candida Moss, called God's Ghostwriters, just looking into the archaeology of the of how the Gospels are written and by whom, and the various things that were written into it to communicate to different people of the same slave class and the same clerical class. That book really left a trace in me. I did the audiobook for it and then bought a copy for myself and reread it. And I happened to be talking to the author today, just saying, the book was great. I did the professional audiobook reading of your book, but it's one of those rare occasions where, credit where it's due, a book stayed with me and it gnawed away at me, and I had to go and get it for myself. But tapping into those very things that you've just illustrated, Jack, about when it comes to, it's not about necessarily a religion placing, or a denomination replacing, or a testament replacing a testament. It's how power mangles it, rewrites it, puts a different orthodoxy through it, to alienate you from history and to alienate you from any contrary kind of thinking. And that book's very good on that very subject, and talks a great deal about the similar Christ figure that the Reverend Franklin is talking about, and how it was tidied up. He was tidied up for the King James Bible, or various other things, and reworked as a different kind of Christ. It just peels away the layers until you get back to the sort of radical Christ of the early Gospels. It's a great book. There's one you can put in alongside your Penda's Fen viewing.
Wow. And honestly, it is one of those texts that is actually enhanced by wider reading as well, isn't it? I mean, if you understand, if you read the Romantics, you're going to get a lot out of this. Yeah. You're going to get a lot out of this.
The church scene actually is incredible, isn't it? Just as a piece of, just as a piece of television production, as a piece of, the ground cracking open, and the voice, and the organ playing, and
the occult nature of the music.
So
the way
intense.
It's a spell and a prayer and a hymn all at the same time. It's just insane. It's brilliant. It is utterly, utterly brilliant.
And he really hits. And credit to him, he hits. He's a young actor. I know he was quite experienced as a child actor, but even so, he hits a heck of a focus in his performance.
There's something very like.
He's not showy as an actor. He's not. But he's very. He has an authentic intensity. It's not like I'm showing you I'm being intense. It's just how he does it. He's focused.
It does look like he is actually experiencing these sort of internal turmoils.
He's not really acting, isn't he? That's the thing. He's just like. He really feels authentically that is Stephen Franklin. And it's quite brave as well. It's a brave performance for a young actor at that point. To play a character who is gay, to play a character who is this, off-putting in many ways. He's actually quite off-putting, and he doesn't pull back from it. A lesser actor would try and inject sympathy, even when he's at his most difficult and Jack said, much of an arsehole. He doesn't. He just that's what's on the page. That's what I'm going to play. But it's there's a lot of bravery in that performance. I think he deserves all the credit, really. I guess he's one of those actors who I think he did make the transition to, but he's not been like a full-time consistent presence. I think he's popped up. Right. Gone away again, popped up, gone away again on things. But I mean, this is
No, he's very good.
He is very good. I mean, and he needed to be.
I think it's a part that could be too easily acted with a big A. Is the problem?
Yeah,
I think that could have killed it actually. For
and
all, it's a great piece of writing and it's great. I mean, Alan Clark could have got someone that he'd worked with who was someone who was about to become a bigger name.
Yeah.
On it instead, and he went with Spencer Banks, and I think that was ultimately a good choice.
A very good decision.
Because you could have had someone like a young Gary Oldman in it, and it would have been too acted.
It would have been too much.
Too acted.
Yeah.
And too recognisable.
Because Oldman worked with Clark by that point, I think. Well, no, a bit later, wasn't it? This is 1970, so no, he worked with Clark later. God, no, he would have been too young. But certainly someone of that ilk, if
you get a false note
too
in
much
this
of an actor,
performance,
it
would kill it.
Oh, it would kill it, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, this does feel like they picked up a school kid who's about 17. Credit.
I mean, the eternal and sort of essentially irrelevant and boring, genre border policing debate. Is this folk horror or whatever? I don't care.
God,
but it has that quality that I go to horror for, which is that sublime quality that the hairs stick up on the back of the neck because what you're seeing, what you're being shown, has given you a kind of awe, somewhere in some part of you. That feeling that I get from sections of the great horror films, The Shining, for instance, and so some of the films that we've talked about. It has that. There are moments, the dream sequence with the demon and the sequence in the church with the voice, and it does have those moments of deep, somatic unease that great horror has.
And it's
I'm quite comfortable calling it horror myself.
Yes,
because I don't think of that as a reductive category. So
no. That's it. That's exactly.
And I think if you have got an intellectual bent, and I don't mean that in the pompous sense, but I just mean in its true sense, someone who likes to engage with things sort of on that level, to have these things which have moments of where the cerebral side of you just falls away, or the desire to denote or connote or work out just falls away, and you're just left with something that is leaves you with a sense of awe, and you can't get a handle on it. It's not rational. Those things it's such a great hit you get.
Isn't it wonderful? And again, it's something that I will go to again and again and again in any genre or form of fiction. Give me that. Give me the visceral.
Because knowing that I have that tendency to engage with things like that, I'm so pleased when that's kind of blown apart. And I just have to experience things totally emotionally or viscerally or instinctively or intuitively. It's really refreshing, because I know my tendency, the tenor of the way I engage with art or culture is to slightly go in on that intellectual level, quote unquote. I'm not saying I'm an intellectual, but it's an intellectual level or an intellectual vantage point, if you like. So it's wonderful when it's blown apart and you're just like, okay, I don't know what I just watched, but I'm getting a hell of a lot of feelings off it.
It's like we said earlier, I think it's part of why the film is so intimidating, because it goes for the gut, doesn't it? It goes for the gut and the soul primarily.
It's great.
The non-rational
barrage of
exactly.
ideas.
It's like I crave those non-rational visceral things, because I know that's not necessarily where I'm coming from. It's like you it's what I was saying earlier about sometimes it's what you need to know rather than what you want to know. Those are the exciting bits.
For me, it's more effective too. It's more effective for fermenting thoughts and ideas rather than having that almost like that overly literal, almost technical description of things. It works for me. It just works for me on a much deeper, more profound level. I think it does more good. I really do.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, because then you can throw away that, or at least turn the volume down on that part of how you engage with things, or certainly how I feel I engage with things. It's like, right, okay, that doesn't become central anymore. But that's probably why I seek these kinds of things out, because I know that they do that. I mean,
Likewise, I
the
find,
quickest hit to that is obviously music. So it's quite interesting. It's quite amusing that he has that whole thing about Elgar, because
right.
that is the shortcut to that, because you can't really intellectualize about music. I mean, you can to a certain degree, but I'm not being a musician, not being someone with that accomplishment. I can't. So it's a really easy shortcut into the sublime, or intuitive, or visceral feelings. But it's really nice when it happens in things which I feel are like more my area, which are like, film or television or novels or whatever. And it's like, you can't quite go the full way with that using that mechanism, if you like. Or that.
Yeah.
But no, give me that any day. Something that arouses, something that excites, something that makes you feel. And also that confuses. As Stephen is confused, as these characters are confused, I love that to bits. I love
the fact that I can still be, I can be in my middle 40s as I am now, and nearly be jumping out of my sofa.
Right.
It's like, okay, I'm getting older, and there's a part of you goes, but to still be,
to be this excited,
to be like, it's bubbling over with like, I don't know exactly what it is I'm feeling, but it feels great, and this thing has knocked me out, and my emotions are kind of all over the place, and I don't know if I would have sort of punched the air or cry or what, it's great that can still happen, because there's another part of you thinks, well, that happens probably more when you're young and you're still sort of getting used to all the things that then you get sort of older and more cynical, and then you're like, well, I've seen this shit before or whatever, and so it's great when it happens. It's like, no, still can have these moments. This is great.
There's something reinforcing and invigorating about it, isn't it? This can still happen. You can still fall in love with something. It's brilliant. It's absolutely wonderful. But it is part of the problem of trying to discuss the text, isn't it?
This has been the hardest one to talk about.
Yeah, definitely.
Number one, because we've never picked up. Well, I didn't join you for for Poltergeist 3 for the simple reason I'd never seen it. So as a three, we've never sort of hate watched anything. We've never sort of had a big.
Not really.
We've
I think
loved the things that we
both of us with the Poltergeist.
Not
Poltergeist 3. We loved that, but the remake. Remake.
That's it.
We hate
the remake, not Poltergeist 3. I beg your pardon. No, Poltergeist 3 you rather like.
3 is surprisingly good.
3 is
about the remake.
Good. It is. The remake
much better than its rep.
Yeah. But this was. But we've always been able to navigate our way through, because there'd at least be certain caveats or things we could focus on. This has been so difficult because not only is it so complex, it's so full, it's so rich and varied. But it's I like it too much, and it's really hard to talk.
It kind of resists coherent criticism.
It totally does.
Criticism in the wider sense, because the ideas are so expansive.
Yeah, it is
then you're back to David Lynch in that thing of
it's so dialectical.
Don't turn it back into words. Don't turn it back into words. Don't turn my work back into words. And I see his point when you get to things like this, or even some of his own work, like it's like I've been tempted, as I say, that thing about wanting to intellectually engage with things. I've been so tempted at times to maybe I should sit down and just for myself, not thinking about it in terms of it being read, but really explore through words things about Twin Peaks: The Return. And then I always go, no, don't do it.
Again,
don't hammer any of this down. Don't.
You would probably find that it defies.
It does anyway, but also it's like no, because you're going to rewatch that again. You are. That's only going to be like a couple of years before you are. Yeah, that's being watched again.
Not quite ready for it yet, but yes, definitely.
I know it's something I will be able to watch for the rest of my life. With maybe 3-4 years in between, but definitely something I can go back to forever. I think it's one of those texts, rather like this one.
I mean, maybe one of the things we should do as a bit of an experiment, perhaps at one point, because we've never done it before, is maybe do something we do hate.
That would be interesting. Actually,
it really would,
because we've never done it really.
I think I would. I mean, it would be fun to just do like the Poltergeist, something like the Poltergeist remake, where it's just It's just bad on every level. So we could just spend a couple of hours just completely ripping the shit out of it. But I think it would, I mean, that would be fun. I'm not against that. But I think it'd be more interesting to find something that was bad in a more interesting way than that.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah,
I'm not even entirely sure what I mean, but I know I mean something.
Yeah.
Yeah, something that's interestingly bad, right?
And I think I'm sort of, because as we talked about on the Wicker Man, I'm definitely not a person who really fights texts. I'm more than willing to go with them. So I always find it very difficult when people say to me, name a novel or a film or something that you really hate. I have to really think about it, because my brain tends to be
strong, isn't it?
filled
very
with things
strong,
that, and I tend to sort of like forget the things I've not really connected with. But I guess the obvious one recently, and Jack will know this only too well because I was like a stuck record by I couldn't believe that I'd got to the end of it, which was The Batman. I couldn't even believe I sat through to the end of it, because not only was it the fucker 3 hours, and not only was it just aesthetically awful, it was, you know, it was, the content was awful. I was like, I must have really hated myself that day, because I sat through to the end.
I did not. I mean, I have a tick where I will sit through I will read the books I hate. I will watch the films I hate right through to the end. Beetlejuice, I didn't. It's one of the very few films in my entire life I was like,
there you go. Damn.
I can't do this. It hurts too much. Michael Keaton, love him. It feels like Michael Keaton doing a Beetlejuice impression, and it's like, no, please, I can't bear it. Also, how do you make a Beetlejuice film that doesn't have the Maitlands in it? How do you do it? I mean, there's something central gone. There's something very, very particular gone.
Yeah.
And the way it sort of hand waves their absence away is sort of like, no.
I mean, it's about them, really, isn't it?
It's about the Maitlands, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? It's about the Maitlands. It's not about Beetlejuice. How many times is that? I haven't said it 3 times. I won't know.
This is like Candyman, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like the funnier version of Candyman. But it's just painful. It is just painful. It only ever works up enthusiasm for its own project when it's doing callback, and they're lame. They're just lame. It's like, oh, do you remember the 1980s? Do you remember this from the 1980s? Yes, I
remember the 1980s, because you haven't left. No one's left it alone.
Right, exactly.
You know, we're deep into the 2020s and nothing's had any shape or identity since the 90s. Right. So of course we remember the 80s.
Yeah, I remember the 1980s. That's when Tim Burton used to make interesting films.
That's when he used to make decent films.
All 2 of them.
Exactly. So here's the other mistake, right? Constantly recalling the better film.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Making me wish I was watching that and not this. And everyone, it's one of those weird projects where nobody feels sincere. Nobody feels like they want to be there. You know? They all feel a little bit like, well, we're older now and we're just doing it and it's a bit of a laugh, isn't it? But we don't really want to be doing it, do we? No, you don't.
No, we don't want, and it's so peculiar because obviously no new ideas can get through. You have to basically smuggle a new idea, or not even a new idea, or a half-baked new idea, using an old format because it's the only way that anything's going to be sold now. I saw a ludicrous thing the other day. I passed it on a bus shelter, a poster on a bus shelter, and I thought, I talk about like the 1980s and not being able to escape. Not being able to escape the past. It's like Bergerac, and it was an advert for like they're basically rebooting Bergerac.
Okay,
but it's like, what the why who even remembers Bergerac?
Why?
And the people who do remember it are not necessarily going to be watching.
They're not champing at the bit for it to come back.
They're not going to be open to this.
Nobody's like,
who's asked for this?
And sitting around thinking, you know what I miss? Bergerac.
Yeah. And if that's what I really miss Bergerac, then they all want John Nettles back and like the original. But this isn't even that. It's like a completely new cast. The only link seems to be the title, and I think they filmed it in Jersey.
Right.
Oh, and it's a cop thing, and it's a police thing, obviously. Right. But it's like, What are we doing? What?
Bergerac was. It was one of those. I've only got dim memories of it, but I recall it as being kind of one of those 80s business dramas that was kind of cosplaying as a cop show.
Miami Vice, wasn't it? It was our Miami Vice because it was rich people and it was boats and. Or am I thinking of Howard's Way? Or were they the same thing?
It was Howard's Way and stuff like that, Triangle and stuff like that. Except that instead of a thrusting small businessman, it was a policeman. But he had like a local businessman friend, didn't he? That's the sort of thing it was. It was incredibly 80s.
Yeah.
It was. How do you translate that? How do you do that now?
Yeah,
because basically all it really
textually
is
how do you do
a title and some trappings to basically get a new drama greenlit.
It's just another fucking cop show, except this one's set on the island of Jersey, and it's got the name of a property that existed before.
Yeah, presumably just to reactivate those column inches, or sorry, to activate the column inches. Oh look, Bergerac's coming back. Well, it's not. It's rather like that. No. It's like that crazy thing I used to find very funny when around the time of like when Doctor Who was having a big anniversary, like its 50th or 60th. They say Doctor Who's been running for 60 years. No, it hasn't. It had a whacking great hole in the middle where it was.
Yeah,
it's like, what are you talking about? And it's like that playing again. It's the Penda's Fen thing. It's like playing around with the narratives that of things that we've actually been through, and then we start thinking of them in a different way. And then you have to stop yourself. It's like, oh, hang on, no, this show hasn't been in 60 years of continual production. It 15 years off. There was 15 years of none of it, unless you were into the books. Part
of the problem with the nostalgia culture, isn't it? When it comes to media, the people creating these things don't necessarily seem to understand that when you tear these things away from their context, they lose something fundamental.
Rather like the economy in general, I forget if we're going to go into political economy and macroeconomics, the things that should be dead certs are giving people enormous headaches. It's like the attempts to keep flogging Bond, yet it's like the actual process of making a new Bond film seems to be something they almost cannot do. Yeah. So I read something today. It's been delayed again. It's been delayed. It's like, guys, you used to make like 2 a year at one point in the 70s or something, or one
used to be a problem,
or one a year. And now you can't make one within 6 years of each other. Not that I think they should be bothered anyway. I mean, I think it's
who the hell wants more?
We don't need it. But
they killed it, didn't they? I mean,
yeah. But also, it's like we haven't needed any for a long time. But again, it's rather like this Bergerac thing. But also, it's like no one seems to even know how to make them anymore. It's like, there was one every 12 months or one every 2 years for the whole of my growing up and for about 20 years before I was born. Now suddenly just the making of one Bond film is like beyond everyone.
It's too big an ask. Too big an ask.
So we can only do one every 10 years. Well, just don't do any.
Did you hear that they're doing Harry Potter again? Did you know?
I knew they were doing it as a series.
I only just found out about this. Yeah, apparently they're going to do a TV series, but it's just the same story again.
Yeah. I was very pleased that Peter Capaldi turned down chance to be Dumbledore. I think I read somewhere. It's like, don't work with Rowling.
Well, who the hell wants to be associated with that? Anything to do with
Cillian
that
Murphy obviously does. So he's off my Christmas card list. Not that he was ever on it, not since Oppenheimer anyway. I mean, Oppenheimer really got him off that list.
Don't take that job. It's career suicide. Nobody's.
At this point, it is.
Because even for your own.
I mean, I love Mads, but he shouldn't have. He shouldn't have done that.
Because even for your own sake, because I still have enough fucking belief. I still have enough. Call me crazy. That in 20 years' time these people will be fucking pariahs, or their reputations will be besmirched. I hope this happens. That this fucking dark age that trans people are having to endure. And I really bloody well hope that in the years, as you know, there's never light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, of course, you know, my God, the whole of the LGBT community still has, you know, if the idea that gay or bisexual men or women are accepted in society is like absolute nonsense.
Yes,
but
it's a nonsense.
the idea
it's the kind of thing only straight people say.
Yeah, but
oh, things are all right now, aren't they?
Yeah,
Though?
exactly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
the idea
we solved that one, didn't we?
You have to be a little bit, you know, unless you're there's a little bit of trepidation around it, more than there used to be about the slurs and the. This is not to say they're stamped out, but you know, that has got to happen to the trans community
as we've come. That's about as far as it's got.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's fucking small potatoes, but you know, it is that you can at least mark some kind of change. And I hope that, you know, that anyone associated with these kind of projects is you know, has to get their comeuppance through it.
Well, they're already struggling. They're already having issues with Rowling's association. They don't want her name on it.
No, and for purely
it's Harry Potter. Her name's on it.
I know.
Her name is Harry Potter.
Yeah,
I know.
She's inexorably linked with it. You know, she is totally entwined with it. She's like Candlewick.
They tried to with Warner Brothers.
She'll get the money.
Well, yeah, that's the truth. They tried. Her name is nowhere near the video games. They've taken her because the video games are. I know, it's absurd, isn't it?
Isn't that just absurd. That's just 2024 all over, isn't it?
We'll
keep on funneling money into this, you know, this gigantic pit that's already got money in it that we pretend is a person, you know. But as long as we don't put her name on it, it's okay because she. Yeah. What?
Yeah.
I know, it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd, and it wouldn't bother me.
Levels of cynicism you can't quite comprehend, isn't it?
It's not even good. That's what gets me. It's also great fantasy.
It's also the attribution of that level of cynicism and idiocy to the audience as well. I mean, I know, you know, there's plenty of stupid and cynical people around, but my God.
Yeah, I know.
But no, I agree. I mean, I agree with you. It's just tripe. And again, like the same story, story again.
I know.
Like there are 8 movies that are still not that old. I mean, the last one only came out like 14 years ago or something like that, 10, 13 years ago. Like, you're going to do the entire thing again on TV? Yeah. Like, ostensibly because the movie adaptations weren't faithful enough. Like, what we're gonna have, like, magic spells with children casting bats made of snot at each other because that's literally in the book. That the world was crying out for that, was it?
Yeah.
And it is
we can do the entire house elf thing, can't we? Because that was cut out of the movies because, you know, Steve Kloves realized what bunch of shit that was. No, this time we can do it. We can have the entire thing about eyeball rolling happy slaves who talk in pidgin English.
Yeah.
I know, right? I know. It's amazing.
And how much of an industry these things, I mean, these things don't move at a glacial enough pace anyway in order to keep them going. I mean, I as I've joked with you guys many times, I'm always like late to every party. And I thought, I might have a look at, I mean, it's already 10 years old. I might have a look at Gotham because I hated the Batman so much. I sort of need an antidote. And the first few episodes are like really fun. I thought, this has got a little bit of humor to it. This has got a little bit of a crackle. And
it's a bit goofy.
It's a bit goofy.
Honestly.
After 13 episodes, I'm like, I've got to check out of this because there's still another 12 of season 1, and this plot has not moved. They have just cycled back to the same scenario. Nothing's moving. I mean, if this was 6 episodes. Great. Someone did say to me, "Why don't you just skip to series 3?" Because obviously everyone knows the story. It's in the cultural consciousness.
It loses all coherence and becomes just nonsense, but it's kind of fun.
That sounds better because at the moment we've just got this What's basically kind of Boardwalk Empire with Batman iconography.
Yeah, it starts to take itself a bit too seriously in the first season.
It's like, come on, guys, you are making a Batman.
Later on, it almost gets like 1960s campy Batman. It almost goes there. It's verging on it. There's
the guy playing Penguin is keeping me on board.
He's great.
Just because he's
good.
Carol Kane, obviously, because Carol Kane.
Oh yes.
There's even, and I don't know what made them do it, but it's brilliant. There's even a homo-romantic subplot between Penguin and the Riddler at one point.
Oh,
it's great. That's kind of cool. Yeah, I'm not even kidding. Penguin develops a massive crush on Edward Nygma, and it's brilliant. It's cute and oddly murderous and really fun.
I'm in that vein of watching, of being really excited when I see Carol Kane in anything. She's obviously turned up in this as Penguin's mum, and she's because firstly it's like, you're an actress in her 70s and you're still getting like work, and you're still getting kind of interesting work, but I still think it's such a great punch to the air thing, because I love the fact that she's the chief engineer of the Enterprise in Star Trek now, and she is so good at it. And Star Trek: Strange New Worlds, she is the chief engineer of the Enterprise, and she is so good. And it's like, because she's just such an idiosyncratic actress anyway. I mean, she does such interesting things, and it's like you've been able to get this quite high profile job on something which is usually filled with young people or your younger side of middle-aged people. But great
good stuff, right? Good stuff. Well, guys, wow.
Yeah.
I don't know, we deviated.
So as Jack was saying, I'll release this episode on Christmas Day. Yeah.
Wicked.
Oh. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, yeah. Alongside, by the way, I'm also planning on releasing our short stories across that period as well.
Thanks for that. That was a very kind invitation.
No, I mean, it's brilliant. It's been really fun, actually, this year. It's been really fun. We've had some great entries.
And thank you for the reading, Jack, as well. That was very good.
They were great
for your reading.
It was great fun listening to them. But your guys will be going up closer to the day, as will mine.
Right.
I was even planning. I was planning on releasing ours throughout the Christmas day. So maybe one Christmas morning, one noon, and one in the evening.
Oh, great!
Well,
that might be cool. Fun.
Absolutely ruddy terrified, because as after saying, "Oh, this would be like really fun to do," and then going, "Oh, the short story form's really hard."
Yeah,
having sort of like thrown myself into an amateur novel, by comparison, that was strangely easier in some ways.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, then it was like, oh right, I've got to write a ghost story. Well, I don't know if it's going to be frightening for a start, and how the hell am I going to write it to 15 minutes? And suddenly it was like, what have I done? What have I done?
Well, it worked for me.
At least you guys got a bit of experience behind you. It was like, oh Christ, what have I done?
A dark figure standing in the shadows with its head on one side staring at you. That's all I need. So you got me. That's fine. George, are you going to be reading one this year? Because I no flattery. I really enjoy your readings. I love it when you read.
I do enjoy. I like reading. Yes. Whose do I have this year? I have. I think I've got Danny's again this year. The way it's worked out, I've got Danny Brown's again.
Santa, you see.
So yes, I will be doing one relatively soon.
That's great.
Relatively soon.
Oh, good.
That's great.
Okay. Well, guys, before we go, anything to chuck out there?
Yeah, my short story. That literally is it.
Eruditorium Press, my writing. I Don't Speak German, podcast about the far right. Patreon, $1 a month, you get advance access to everything. And Blue Sky, @timescarcass at bsky.social. That's me.
Excellent. Links below, guys. Links below always and forever. The short stories will be here, by the way. They'll be up on Exaggerated Elegy, so you'll be able to listen to them as a bit of a Christmas treat.
Be gentle.
Same as usual for me, guys. Find me here on Exaggerated Elegy. All of my published work over at strangeplaygrounds.com or at the Evil Empire of Amazon. Hellraiser UHD set, Quartet of Torment, me and Kit on the Hellbound disc. Really proud of that featurette. And my non-fiction you can find at the Ginger Nuts of Horror under the My Life in Horror tag. Wow, it's almost a bit of a relief to get through that one, to be honest, guys, because it was giving me a bit of agina. That was. It was like,
yeah.
I was a bit sort of, are we going to be able to even begin to scrape the surface? Are we going to be able to do this justice? But wow, Penda's Fen, it was just amazing
Stuff.
Just people go out and watch it. Get a copy.
Yeah, please, God, it's hard to find, guys. It's actually very hard to find. It's not available on any streaming service, insofar as I'm aware. But there is a BFI Blu-ray out there, which is very, very good. So, yeah please seek it out, because it is. I would hazard to say it may be one of the most brilliant texts we've explored in this series. It's just incredible, just incredible.
Yeah, I agree. As I say, I rewatched it for the first time in ages for this. Floods of tears, totally blown away by it. Instantly became, having already seen it and loved it, but this time round, just instantly one of my favorite movies. And then like a week later, I watch it again because we're going to have another go recording, and it has exactly the same effect again. Just stunning.
I cannot emphasize how good it is. I just can't. It's brilliant. Until next time, guys, Merry Christmas and bye-bye.
Take care.
Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.